Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I have moved my studio around to get a better feel for the lighting and everything else. It took me a while to figure out how to make that work here. It's funny, everywhere I go, it takes me a while to kind of soak in to get the studio straight. Like the lighting and everything else is always somewhat of a challenge depending upon where you are because each place is a little bit different. The colors in Nepal are different. Well, obviously, I know that sounds stupid. If you are in Albania, for example, or if you're in Malaysia, the feeling is different. The look is different. The colors are different. The textures, those things are different depending upon where you are. Like if you're in South America, very bright, vibrant reds, yellows, etc. Like they go all out in regards to the colors and everything else that they use. If you're in Europe, it's more muted. So if you're in like Austria, Germany, they're very austere. You know, it's like if you're jaywalking, they'll be like, "Hey, just rando. Shouldn't do that." It's like Europe is very weird, and it puts for Americans, it can either be off-putting or helpful, it depending on the context. So there was one time, and this has nothing to do with the show. I'm just saying, there was one time I was in Albania. I was trying to get a cab. Each cab kept passing me by, and a guy riding his bike couldn't speak a lick of English. He's pointing, and basically what he's pointing to is, "Hey, there's a taxi thing over here." And then he slowly rides his bike to direct me to the taxi thing. My ex-wife and I were in Czech Republic once, and we we had like a 14-hour layover. It was some insane layover. The guy behind the counter was like, "Hey, if you need to get to a hotel, when I get off, I will drive you to the hotel." Now, this is unheard of in America. Nobody at an American Airlines is going to drive you to a hotel. And that's exactly what the guy did. I don't even think he wanted money for it. We ended up saying, "Hey, let's give you something for it as a thank you." He even sat out there and waited to ensure that the hotel would take us in. Like Europe is very interesting in that way, but it also goes the other way where they would give you advice that you didn't ask for, didn't want, that would annoy the hell out of you at times when they do that. It goes both ways. Those things, that doesn't really happen in the States. Here, the colors are, you get a lot of browns, a lot of, I mean, you can kind of see it in the background. Like that picture looks like Nepal, if that's the case. Somebody said I should have a travel blog. Yeah, maybe you're right. Because I don't exactly know when I'm going back to the States. The point of this trip was not a vacation, as I've said before. I wish it was a vacation, because if it was, I'd be in the Himalayas or something like that. If you notice, I usually sit and be in one location. I effectively live in the location for 2 to 3 months. It's not a travel thing. I didn't get to see any of Indonesia. Most of my day is spent doing this. You wake up in the morning around from 1 to, no, from here it's 12. It depends on where you are, but from, let's say, from 12 to 5:40 my time, you're preparing for the show. You do the show for the 3 hours. And then it takes another 3 or 4 hours after to process the videos, because I have a hard time figuring out titles and everything else. That's assuming I don't pass out, in which case I would have to do it in the morning. In Caleb's case, for example, I have to put his video out today. In Mark's case, I royally fucked up and did not put monetization on that video because I was halfway sleepy or halfway unconscious as I was processing the video. No, most of your day is spent working. And so vacation, no. I would love if this was, but not so much. There is the cultural experience that you get from being in the locations because you're living in the location. So it's not like you're in touristy stuff. You are buying groceries, taking cabs, taking the bike to the hospital or a cab to the hospital, taking things that you need to get for the house, things that you need to keep upkeep, those type of things. It's almost like you're living like you're in an apartment for X number of months in a different location. So the coffee shops that you may go to, the chess clubs that you may find, it's those type of things. It's almost like if you were living wherever you were living and you just kind of make a life out of it for the time that you're there. You get a feel for the place in a different way as opposed to just being a tourist where you're just jumping in, jumping out of tourist spots. It's not that. It's different. It's rewarding though. It is. It's just the pace can be a bit much and it's kind of hard to keep up sometimes. But all things being equal, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me on the show. My name, obviously, Jamal Thomas. This is indeed the Jamal Thomas Show. I've fixed the lighting. I fixed the area. The sound should be okay. The world is great. And I hope you guys are doing fantastic. Obviously, the world is not great. You know, it's funny. Doing this channel and the content that we typically do and the stuff that we view, it can be dark. It can be very dark. And maybe there needs to be some kind of lighting element associated with the channel to go along with this. Because it's, you know, I've had guests who have been in the depths of depression because they're focused, right? Like, I try to take the position that if something is happening that is horrendous, you being out of sorts doesn't make it any less horrendous, if that makes sense. You feel some kind of way about it, and it gives you this perspective of the world that gets dark. Like, there's a book. It's funny. Sometimes it's very hard to communicate stuff without using pictures and images to do it. In Three Body, that section where, what is it, Ji Wen? I can't think of her name. But the one who was living during the Chinese Revolution, they killed her dad in front of her. They put her in like prison because she was a scientist. And apparently physics was a capitalist plot. So they put her in prison. And when she met and contacted the aliens, they said, look, I'm a pacifist. Do not contact us again. We will take your planet. And in the depths of depression and being a bit misanthropic as a result of the life that she led and what was taking place around her, she was like, we cannot deal with our own affairs. Come get us. Effectively, this is irredeemable. This needs to change. We can't deal with it. And we have forfeit the right to run the affairs of this planet. That's pretty dark. And yet, I feel where she's coming from. I mean, we sit here and watch the world look over and not care about a genocide that was taking place. And people can make the argument, well, the public did care, and yet the governments of those publics didn't do anything about it, which brings up the point of, okay, well, if the government is supposed to be a democracy or a parliamentary democracy or something where the public rules, I mean, that is, after all, what Europe and the United States claim to be, then how did the public not have any impact when it was pissed off, cantankerous, protesting, you know, setting stuff on fire? How did that not have any impact on the political space? Now, you could say that there was somewhat of an impact because those governments did turn around and was like, okay, well, we want to declare a second Palestinian state, and we think Israel is doing this. But keep in mind, those governments completely and entirely supported the terrorist squatter state of Israel. Even as they were doing that because they needed to somehow put a release valve. But they weren't doing anything in real terms, nor would they have done anything in real terms. I mean, even the BRICS nations, Russia, China, et cetera, they just ultimately watched and continue to work with Israel out of this kind of realist notion of politics. It makes you feel the world is irredeemable. And yet I have to tell myself, you know, there are good people on this planet. Yeah, it can be dark. That's all. It can be dark. How do you like work for the Russian government? I don't work for the Russian government. I don't. Oh, you mean when I was at Sputnik? Sputnik allowed more freedom than pretty much any news network that you would come across. So, for example, like on MSNBC or on CNN, or for that matter, on Fox News, those people had to toe a line. Those people were directly related and had to toe the line of the Democratic Party. We were effectively allowed to be who we were and say what we wanted to say. There was pressure being applied when the Israeli thing took place, when Hamas on October 7th, when that took place, there was pressure like, all right, we're going to play this straight. We're not going to be, overboard about it, because they knew that the people who they hired were hard asses on the issue of Israel and Gaza. That said, though, after the first few days, when it became clear that Israel was committing a genocide, we were free. So, yeah, there was that. The stuff that we were allowed to produce, we did our own shows. There was no way we could have ever been that honest on mainstream media. So, if you're asking me how did I like work at Sputnik, it was the honor of my life to work at Sputnik. The honor of my life. Full stop. There's no caveat in that. There's no area to cover. It was the honor of my life to work at that network. Full stop. Full stop. Give me 1 second. I'm going to make sure I didn't mess something up. Okay, good. Yeah. So there are a few stories. I have a damn good show for you today. Warwick Powell is going to be here. Warwick is a fantastic guest. It is one of those things that I really enjoy doing, where I get the opportunity to what I call grow a guest. And I know this sounds weird, but what it means is you bring on a guest. The audience have no idea who that guest is. They don't know the guy. And so oftentimes when the audience doesn't necessarily know a guest, they're kind of like, So when you put out the show, you may get like 1,000 views, maybe 2,000. But then as they get to know the guests, the numbers go up. And so Warwick, I don't remember where he started, but Warwick is hitting like 10,000 views on his own spots now. That is great. I love that, because it means that the audience, enjoys the guests as much as I do, learns as much from the guests as much as I do. And it becomes a benefit to all of us. Dimitri Lascaris and Daniel Lazare are going to be on for a debate today. Now, this popped off because, Warwick, give me 1 second, I'm coming to you now. This popped off because Daniel attacked Dimitri. Dimitri responded, and both decided they were willing to come on to have it out in a conversation. That's great. Raymond McGovern is going to be on later today in the show. We have a damn good show for you today. Speaking of that, let me go to my first guest. I see him prepping in the background. You look great, Warwick. Getting the tie straight. And you're in the poly colors. That's awesome.
How are you?
How you doing? You doing okay today?
I'm okay. And you?
I am doing well. Better that you're joining me. Warwick Powell. Warwick Powell is adjunct professor of Queensland University of Technology, chairman of Smart Trade Networks Group of Companies, and president of Data Integrity and Supply Chain Association, Inc. And Warwick, I learn something from you every time you come on the show. I always appreciate you joining me. How you doing today? I'm glad you're doing well. You did answer that.
Well, I am actually doing better because I'm here.
Well, that's always good to hear. That's always good to hear. Warwick also is a prolific writer, and he writes articles all the time, and these articles are just great. Two of them I want to discuss. Now, these articles come in the context of Donald Trump being, well, I guess he's going to South Korea tomorrow. And there's an expectation that he's going to meet Donald Trump on Thursday, tomorrow. So that is a highly anticipated meeting. People are eager to see what that meeting what's going to come out of that particular meeting. Now, in the light of that, you wrote two articles. One, Lessons from Keynes and Versailles for Multipolar World. In fact, let me show them just so the audience can see them. They're on Substack. Definitely check out Warwick's Substack channel. You will learn a ton, every bit as much as I do, because I read all of his articles. The other article is this one, Illusion of American Leverage. This article is fascinating, by the way, because in this article, you kind of point out that regardless of all of the boisterousness and everything else that the U.S. is coming with in preparation for the meeting, Trump is like, I don't know if I'm going to meet Xi. Okay, I'll meet Xi. And then you got Scott Benson coming out. Yeah, the farmers are being hurt, but, I'm also a soy farmer. I'm hurt by this also. It's like, are you serious? But you have all of this boisterous talk coming out of the United States in lieu of this meeting. And you point out they have no cards. And yet they're posturing as if they do. Go into that. Detail that for me. Like, make your case. Despite the U.S. posturing, why don't they have any cards?
Look, this goes back to the situation on the 2nd of April when Donald Trump first announced his Liberation Day tariff. And I published a piece on that day, which actually, in a sense, said, if anything, it's an invitation for the rest of the world to be liberated from American hegemony. And the reason I said that is because the structural transformations of the American economy over the last 40-odd years, together with the structural evolution of the global distribution of productive capabilities, basically meant that the United States had a very thin real economy and a very top-heavy financialized economy. And push comes to shove, it's countries that ultimately have genuine, real use value, productive capacity that will call the shots. You can't eat dollars. You have to eat food. Economies are energy transformation systems. You actually, in the end, need access to energy sources. And as we know, in complex supply chains where there are a lot of sophisticated inputs that go into processes upstream before ending up in products downstream, without the technologies and the capabilities, as well as access to the raw materials, you're really going to be dependent upon those who do. And that was the situation. The other reality is that if you look at the composition of trade that has evolved over the last 20 years or so, we see that China in particular, so let's talk about the China-US trading relationship. China has progressively diversified its trading partners around the world to a point where prior to this year, the United States contributed about 14% of China's total exports. By the time of, by now, a few months into the on-again, off-again Liberation Day tariffs, the United States contributes a little bit less than 10% of China's total exports. In other words, the United States market is becoming increasingly less important as time goes by. That's a relative idea, of course, because it's a big economy. It's not an unimportant nation. So every time I talk about these things, I always have to remind people that these are relative questions, not absolute questions. But nonetheless, in the scheme of things, the US market is simply nowhere near as important as it once was. And China's ability to diversify its trading relationships, as evidenced by the last 10, 15 years, and more importantly, as evidenced by the last few months, shows that China's economic structure and its enterprises and industries can adapt far quicker to the new trading environment than the United States can. In other words, the adverse impacts on China, and there are some, distributional ones, some particularly trade-exposed enterprises will be affected, obviously more than others. But in the end, China can adapt far quicker than the United States can. And China's got the materials. As I often say, not only does China have the cards, the reason China has the cards is because it makes the cards.
Well, you point out something in your article, and this is a bit confusing to me because it's in economic speak, but just to read it, and I want to get you to break this down for me. You said China exports to the United States account for approximately 2.8% of its nominal GDP, roughly 500 to 560 billion annually, based on an 18 to 20 trillion economy. So you're effectively saying China's economy is from 18 to 20 trillion dollars, and that of that 18 to 20 trillion, the U.S. only counts from 500 to 560 billion. It said this
Yeah.
figure was significant in absolute terms, represents only about 15 to 20% of China's total exports. So in the
Yeah.
sense that of all the exports that China puts out, this represents only 15 to 20%.
Yeah.
And then you point out, you said, which reached a record of 328.6 billion in September 2025 alone, surging 8.3% year over year, despite the global headwinds. So you're saying, despite all of this, China's exports still grew 8.3% in
Yeah.
spite of the tariffs and everything else that the United States was doing.
Well, not only did it grow overall, it did so whilst its exports to the United States fell. In other words, what
Interesting.
happened in terms of its exports to the rest of the world, it had to grow faster than the rate of decline of exports to the United States. And that's
Right.
what I mean by the ability to adapt and adjust. And, I mean, it's a difficult idea for many in the United States to get their head around, not because they're silly. It's because coming from a culture that has talked a lot about consumerism and the sort of power of the American consumer and the US dollar, there is a sense that the US consumer is the center of the universe. But clearly that's not the case. And it's one of these things where a nation of 340 million people to these days, and let's not forget there's 8 billion people in the world, right? So 340 million people, it's about 4% of the world's population or thereabouts,
Right.
it has 14% or something like that of GDP. So it's an outsized GDP compared to population, which, needless to say, creates this impression that that without us, the United States consumer, the world would collapse. Well, clearly the world won't, and the world doesn't. If the lesson hadn't been learned already out of the experiences of the sanctions and all the rest on Russia, and let's not forget what's happening now these last 6 months isn't just something that's fallen from the sky out of the blue. This actually began in early 2018 when Trump version 1.0 launched the trade wars initially. Remember,
Right.
in March 2018, he said that trade wars are good and easy to win. Clearly, they haven't been that good, and they're not easy to win at all. But this has been an ongoing continuation of attempts by one administration and after another to strangle the Chinese economy. And it's done so on the basis of a false analysis of the importance of trade to the Chinese economy, number one. And number two, it has an overestimation of the centrality of the American economy as well. So when you underestimate one and overestimate the other, the fact that you make catastrophic strategic miscalculations is pretty much an inevitable consequence.
You go further in this piece. You even make the point of saying, if the US just says, screw it, and we're going to have 100% tariffs, hell, let's say 300, 500%, let's take it to the moon.
Yeah.
And that all trade is cut off between the US and China, that this is still not overtly significant to the Chinese economy, that they can effectively make moves to change, either, let's say, increase investment in regards to, let's say, infrastructure. They can move their trade over to other countries. I mean, China just signed a deal with the ASEAN countries over the last couple of days on the sidelines. They can, basically, your point is, China can jigger their trade relationship, not to mention investment, or even cut taxes. And that would effectively, let's say, leverage is the wrong word for it. That would
Offset.
minimize. Yeah, that would offset. That's a better word for
Yeah.
it. Thank you. It would offset whatever they were going to lose from the standpoint of trading with the United States, meaning this is not overtly dramatic. You even make the point of saying if China wanted to take a nuclear option, they could dump the dollars that they have at their disposal, because the moment that trade is cut off, that necessity of those dollars become less relevant in regards to China's economy.
Yeah, look, and I don't think China will do that, I should say, but
You did say,
but when
right?
you think through the sort of theoretical possibilities, if there is no trade relationship between the countries, then you do wonder why a country would need to hold the foreign reserves of its of a no longer trading counterparty, right? You only have those dollars because you intend on using those dollars to settle accounts, particularly if you're importing things from the United States. And also if you're buying things in other parts of the world where dollars are accepted. Now, that has been, of course, part and parcel of the trading practice for the last 40 or 50 years. And we all know of the link that was created in the early 70s explicitly between the oil market and dollars. But even that's starting to come apart over the last few years. Oil trading has begun to take place in non-US dollar terms, and the Saudis have explored it. There have been some trials done. The Russians, of course, have been transacting in oil without US dollars, and Iran has as well. So the sort of strong link between the oil market and dollars has unraveled already. We're also seeing this in other commodities as well. So, for example, in the last month or so, there was negotiations between the Chinese iron ore or the steel industry, the buying consortium, and BHP, which is an Australian publicly listed company, which is a major iron ore miner and an exporter from Australia. And the negotiations went on for about a week. And they were about a number of things, but one of the features was that the future trade transactions would be settled in RMB, and that the transactions would actually also be priced in RMB. So on a major commodity like iron ore, we're shifting away from dollar dependency as far as a pricing mechanism and the settlement mechanism is concerned. So, now this pattern's happening anyway. It's being accelerated by all of these tariffs, because you've got to remember, in the last 6 months, American exports have actually fallen. American exports have actually fallen, contrary to the grand promises. The grand promise was American exports would grow, imports would fall, the trade deficit would shrink, but American exports have fallen, and in large part that's a consequence of other countries. Some reciprocal tariffs, of course, China, as well as countries starting to look for alternatives. Nobody wants to be tied into a system that is unreliable and where the key mechanisms, US dollars, are weaponized. So we've got an environment now where the need for US dollars for trade settlements is slowly but surely diminishing. And countries are now pursuing alternatives. I mentioned Russia before, of course. We know that over 95% of Russia's trade is now settled in either rubles or RMB, basically, with a little bit of rupee and UAE dirham. But basically, they got forced off the US dollar system. And other countries are moving that way too. The swap lines that have been created between China's central bank and 30 odd, almost 40 other counterparty central banks in the world enables transactions to be undertaken and settled in RMB. We are now seeing countries issue RMB denominated bonds as a way of getting RMB, which will help them settle their trades with China in RMB. So Indonesia this week has just done that with the first ever tranche of panda bonds, or dim sum bonds, as they're sometimes called, and Hungary did so recently, about 2 months ago, and Russian oil companies, of course, do the same, right? So the Russian oil companies are raising RMB so that they can use RMB to settle accounts with Chinese counterparts when they are buying things from China. So all of this stuff's just happening. It's unfolding, and there's no big bang. Right? That's the point. We've always got to remember there's no one day where you wake up and you say, oh, well, that's the end of the dollar. That's not how it's going to work. The dollar's still going to be important because the United States is a big economy, and the dollar's still relevant for everybody who lives and works in the United States, first and foremost, right? But it'll just be less important, which really means that I think the United States, if we can get a soft landing, will, in a sense, come down to earth and one day wake up and just be more normal as a nation, instead of carrying on like a like an exceptional, an exceptional, something or another, but it'll just be more normal. I mean, that's certainly my hope anyway.
What happens if the U.S. does lose this the dollar as a reserve currency? What did he call it? I forget something privilege. There's a name for it to come to me in a moment.
The exorbitant privilege.
Exorbitant privilege, yeah. What happens if that exorbitant privilege goes away and we're 38, 40, let's say $45 trillion in debt? I mean, that seems to be a disaster.
There isn't a solvency problem in that sense, right? Because it prints its own money, right? So it's never going to run out. Its problem is it has a number of other dimensions. So it's not that it's problem free. I think the first problem it has is that if the United States dollar is less acceptable around the world only because no one needs it in the way that they used to or willing to accept it, then the United States is actually going to have to earn foreign currencies to be able to pay for imports, right? And what that means is that the United States is going to either have to figure out how it can generate more exports to earn the foreign currencies, or it will have to tighten its belt. The United States privilege, in part, has been that it's able to buy things from around the world by issuing what are essentially IOUs. That's all it is. So everyone else in the world has collected American IOUs.
Wait, explain that. You said they've been able to buy stuff by issuing IOUs.
Well, the dollar is an IOU, right? I mean, the dollar basically, currencies is basically a claim on something in the future, right? So, the person who has something is obliged to accept the dollar as payment, right? That's an IOU, I'll swap it for something. But other than its use as an IOU, the ability to swap it for something else in the future, you can't do anything with it. It's not like you can, run an oil refinery with it, or manufacture a car with it, or eat it. You've got to swap it for something, and so the United States has gotten away really with a system where it literally said to the rest of the world, "Look, just give us the stuff, right? Give us things that make our life better and easier, and in exchange for that, just take this thing that we basically issue ourselves. We'll sign the little IOU and give it to you. Look, you can use as many of these later." And of course, there's just more and more of them floating around the global system. Now, what do people do with it? Well, what do central banks do with it? And so central banks are sitting on a pile of US dollars, and they're thinking, well, I guess I can keep some of that as dollars, which they do. And then they buy, other dollar-denominated assets, which are principally bonds, right? Because instead of holding dollars, which don't earn an interest, you might as well swap the dollars for a different asset, which does earn you an interest. And the beauty of the bond historically is that it's entirely liquid. It's as good as a dollar, except it earns an interest. And what a no-brainer. If I came to you and I said, look, you can earn 0.5% on holding a dollar, or I'll offer you 4% if you give me the dollar, and I'll give you a bond instead. What are you going to do? Well, I'll take the bond, right? So that's what they've done. And of course, other things that you do with the dollar is you end up buying stocks, right? So that's helped boost the stock exchange. And why stocks? Well, because stocks are potentially an income earner, number one. Blue chip stocks are typically capital value growth stocks. And it's liquid, which means you can swap out of stocks whenever you want as well. If you need cash, you can swap out of stocks. Then what else do you do? Well, you start looking at real estate, so you buy real estate, or you buy into real estate trusts, or you buy some other exotic financial instrument. Right? So this is what countries end up doing when they've got surplus dollars. Right? This is great. This has been great for America. America as an economy as a whole has been able to get all sorts of things from the world on the back of this promise. How good's that? But of course, Donald Trump sees that the other way. He saw that as a trade deficit, right? Because he could only see one side of the ledger. For him, the side of the ledger that mattered was the money going outside of the ledger. he never actually paid any attention to the things coming in
Yes.
that Americans used side of the ledger. And
Wow,
right, I mean,
that's
the other
wild.
thing, by the way, that people do with these dollars is buy American services and goods and things like that. So, you know, whether it's paying for software licenses, um, uh, you know, Hollywood, you name it. You know, the
Well,
American
as you even
services
say,
sector has
stocks and
got
bonds,
stocks and bonds and all of that. So,
real estate.
so that's how the systems work, right? It just churns dollars. It's been great for the American stock market. And of course, because it's been great for the stock market, it's actually really good for the top 10% of American wealth owners, because 93% of stock market value is owned by 10% of American households.
Right.
So this system's fantastic. Now, who else owns bonds other than, you know, foreign governments or foreign, you know, central banks? Well, you know, relatively wealthy people through various investment vehicles. They also trade in bonds. So from their point of view, they're earning interest as well. Right? So how good's this? Rich people are earning interest on the back of dollars that they've converted into bonds. The stock market's being pumped because people who've got a surplus of cash are pouring it into the stock market as a relatively liquid market. So asset values are going through the roof. I mean, if you tracked money supply growth and asset valuations, whether it's the S&P 500, um,
Mhm.
whatever property, whatever it is, you'll just see these things map one to one against each other pretty much.
Why doesn't China drop bonds? That's something that you hit in your piece also, that at the point where this trade war was taking place. Because in the beginning of the trade war, China and the US apparently came to a deal. The US never really kept the deal and started still poking China, poking the bear, or poking the dragon, let's say. And China's response was the rare earth minerals. Why go with rare earths as opposed to, let's say, dropping some of the treasuries that they were holding?
Well,
The nuclear option, as you call it.
yeah, yeah. Look, the rare earths was, of course, a reflection of the importance of the material economy, and in fact, it really went after, you know, one of the dimensions of the soft underbelly, if you will, and it was
Mhm.
principally around the military-industrial complex. I don't think China's got any interest at all in radically disrupting, you know, the normal real economy. In fact, quite the opposite.
I see.
It wants to be seen as a relatively responsible actor globally, which means it needs to conduct itself in certain ways. But it was an incredibly powerful, you know, lever, and mainly because something in the order of about 78% of American military equipment relies on 78% of Chinese inputs, right?
Right.
So it was a very powerful lever because it went to the heart of the military industrial complex. In terms of the bonds, look, I think that there's a few reasons why China has no interest in, you know, that so-called nuclear option. Often people use the phrase, you know, they're dumping more bonds and all this sort of stuff, but I actually don't
Japan.
think that's been happening,
Yeah.
in large part because you haven't seen the yields fly through the roof in the way that you'd expect should a country like China seriously be dumping bonds. What's been happening, because obviously China's holding of you know, treasuries has been slowly but surely diminishing over the last, you know, 10 plus years. And that largely happens because as those treasuries mature, China simply has no longer renewed them, you know, with the
Mhm.
next tranche. So when your bonds mature, you get your dollars back basically. And what usually happens is that you get the dollars back and you recycle it into the next tranche of bonds, and away it goes. But China clearly hasn't done that, so it's let the maturing bonds go. It's taken the dollars, and then it's gone and done other things with the dollars, including, you know, more recently buying gold, buying up oil, building stockpiles of this, that, and the other. But it certainly hasn't been buying more treasuries. So over time, its holdings of treasuries diminishes. The
It's
other
gone
thing it's
down.
used those treasuries for over the last 10 years is actually a security for the issuance of RMB backed or RMB denominated loans for Belt and Road initiative projects. So this is what we call hypothecation, where you take a financial instrument like a bond and you use that as security against which you issue another. A lot of finance. So China essentially used its massive holdings of US dollar denominated financial assets as security to create an RMB ecosystem from within a US dollar dominated ecosystem. So that's the second reason. It's been very, very useful to do that. The third reason is that China doesn't see any rational reason why it should seek to radically diminish the value of these assets, by which I mean the things that it might be able to swap these assets for in the future. Why would it do that, out of spite? Well, countries really don't conduct themselves usually out of spite if it means shooting yourself in the foot. That's a silly thing to do. And the last reason, I think, is that China, as I mentioned earlier, does see itself as a great nation that needs to conduct itself responsibly. And part of conducting itself responsibility is not going out of its way to oil the market. In other words, to basically create mayhem on the market, which of course causes problems for lots of other people. So China doesn't want to be responsible for creating those sorts of disturbances that could have ripple effects on many others in the world. They're the main reasons why China, I think, doesn't pursue that particular course of action.
You also pointed out that it would depreciate the value of the dollar by like 15-20%, which would damage the amount of money that China had in regards to the treasuries themselves. So let's say if they dump half, the dollar drops 15-20%, then the amount that they hold now has less value associated with it, not to mention everybody else that has dollars. Now, that's fascinating. I mean, basically, as you point out, a nuclear option, it screws over a lot of people. It's not just them getting back at the U.S. with the trade war.
Look, there's lots of unintended consequences and ripple effects, right? So I think China's mindful of the fact that you do these sorts of things and you do run the risk of catalyzing contagion in ways that you never intended. And it's been there and done that. It's seen how contagion in financial markets can get out of hand very, very quickly, particularly when you don't know what's connected to what. And what happened in 2008 is a great recent example of that. So I think China's just particularly cautious. It's conservative on these sorts of issues. It doesn't want to damage itself, which is one of the potential consequences. So that's the first reason. Secondly, it doesn't want to be seen to be acting irresponsibly. And thirdly, in relation to that, it doesn't want to create unintended consequences on others, to a point where others will see China as acting in bad faith and acting in ways that cause them damage.
What are your expectations tomorrow in the meeting with Trump and Xi Jinping? If indeed the U.S. has no cards, and I would imagine on some level the U.S. has to know that it is not necessarily in the best position in going up against China in this. What does the U.S. want out of this meeting? What does China want out of this meeting? And what do you have? What are your expectations?
Well, I think at a broad level, and that's piece that you mentioned that I'd published a couple of days ago, which is the lessons of Keynes and Versailles.
Right.
That sort of sets, I think, a strategic frame, which is this idea that the victor needs to behave in ways that are very magnanimous. The lesson out of Versailles, which was the treaty imposed upon Germany at the end of the First World War, ultimately laid the groundwork for German resentment and impoverishment that then led to the political movements of the 1930s. And Keynes in 1919 saw that as a distinct possibility from what was an incredibly one-sided set of arrangements post-war. So the lesson out of that is that if you want to secure a permanent peace, victors actually need to behave in generous and not punishing ways. Now, that's a difficult thing to do because, of course, the first thing you want to do is punish, those that you defeated. But you can see how Russia, in some respects, I think, has that issue in the back of its mind. It's trying to conduct its war in Ukraine in a way that has the space available for a post-war settlement that doesn't require this sort of total enforcement of a capitulation, because that breeds resentment and those sorts of things. You've got to, in a sense, think about how you rebuild after conflict. And I think China also has a very clear sense that the trend of our times, which Xi Jinping talks about a lot, is essentially the ongoing unfolding of multipolarity. Now, that's the trend. Where that goes, well, who knows? But you certainly can't push against the trend. What you can try and do is guide it, ride the wave, give it a bit of shape, and try to make sure that as these forces work their way through these complex systems, which is, global economies, societies, and nations, that they don't leave too much damage in their wake, but also lead to some more constructive and positive outcomes. And so multipolarity could either be, incredibly chaotic, or it could actually be a set of institutions that lays the groundwork for a future where indivisible peace becomes a much more powerful operating principle. Now, the only way you can do that is for those who are on the rise, or who are going to, in a sense, prevail, to behave in very generous and magnanimous ways. The vanquished, regardless of what they've done in the past, need to have a sense that they have a meaningful place in the future. Otherwise, you are breeding or laying the groundwork for resentment and ultimately ongoing instability. Set against that backdrop, what can we look forward to? I think China knows that it has the negotiating strength insofar as the transactions are concerned, but it's looking beyond that. It's looking to see how this set of events over the last 6 months, and in fact over the last 8 years, are part and parcel of processes that will shape what multipolarity looks like going forward. And China, I think, wants to see a future in 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years' time where there is open trade, where there is an ability for countries to coordinate and to collaborate, where the United States, as one of the major countries and economies of the world, is actually connected to the world and has a stake in the world's future, as opposed to, putting up the fence and saying, well, that's not for me. And as a result of that, China has no interest in decoupling. It has said that from day one, and one of the obvious reasons, even though I think it could adjust to a decoupling far better and quicker than the United States can, China doesn't have a desire to decouple because, one, it incurs costs in doing it short term, but it undermines its own sense of what multipolarity needs to be in the future. It needs to be an inclusive set of arrangements, which means, there will be a détente which enables the United States economy to function. There is no interest in impoverishing America. I've said on many occasions that an impoverished America is not in the interests of the world, mainly because when America's impoverished, it loses its ability to discover peace for itself, right? So it's no longer at peace with itself, and we see that already, and you and I have discussed that on many occasions.
Yes.
But it means it also projects that lack of peace outwards, because it's looking for enemies and others to blame. And that's no good for anybody either. So China does not want to have an impoverished America. It wants to see an America that is actually prosperous. Often people in China will say, if I'm doing business with others, do I want to be doing business with poor others who can't buy some of the great things that we make? Or do I want to do business with wealthy others? Well, I want to do business with wealthy others. And I think out of all of that, we'll see movement towards a settlement of the trade situation. One last thing I'll say, I mean, I obviously haven't touched on any particularly specific points, which I guess we can go into if we've got a little bit of time. But I think the other thing that this rare earths process has shown, and this goes to the broader point, is that the the nature of the distribution of political and economic power globally has shifted decisively. Imagine March 2018, when Trump first announced the trade wars. By the end of 2018, by the end of 2018, the Canadian authorities, at the behest of the American government, had arrested Meng Wanzhou, who
Yes.
vice president of Huawei and the daughter of Huawei's founder.
Damn.
Clearly an aggressive, incredibly aggressive move on, a prominent individual of one of China's most important companies. Now, China did not roll out rare earth things then. One of the reasons, of course, was concerns around its ability to access helium, which the United States had. But I think also China simply did not believe that it had the capacity to pull it off and hold the line. It felt that it was still at that point in time too vulnerable. Today, 9th of October, it announced the export licensing regime. The United States went apoplectic. And it didn't change a thing, right? That regime is now in place. We're not arguing about whether that regime is going to exist in the future. We're simply arguing about when it will fully come into effect, what the terms and conditions are going to be, what the process and mechanisms, etc. That was never going to happen 8 years ago. It's happened today. And that tells you that China is now confident that it can go toe-to-toe. Now, China doesn't want to go toe-to-toe. The point that's been made is that China is a peer, and if you want to deal with China, you deal with it as a peer. In other words, as an equal and with respect. And having set that benchmark, I think we're now able to move forward with a lot clearer air. Rare earths, the discussion's going to be around how the export licensing regime will be implemented. Will there be white lists for fast tracks or fast lanes? How do people get on white lists? Will there be companies that won't be allowed to access the rare earths? We talk about the kinds of uses that will be permitted. China said, as a matter of principle, it won't provide permission for rare earths to go to military, production. Now, there may be some conditions around that, depending on, a particular application. China's also said that civilian and humanitarian uses will be uses that will always be allowed, subject to the licensing and the paperwork being done. And then you've got this big grey area in the middle, which is dual use. Right? What constitutes dual use technologies? Issue number one. How they are then to be audited. How do you ensure compliance down the track? How do you verify that licensed users are not doing the wrong things? All of that has to be worked out. The other issues, go to companies on sanction lists. I wouldn't be surprised if many of these start to get ticked off, right? They're easy things to do, actually, though historically they haven't been done very much because the United States has never had to. But they are actually not difficult things to do. The issue around the port fees that are being charged on Chinese-made vessels and China's reciprocal response to that, I wouldn't be surprised if that gets cleared quite quickly as well. It's a relatively low piece of hanging fruit, and frankly, it doesn't do anything in terms of the United States' own ambitions to rebuild the United States shipbuilding industry, which ostensibly is the reason why this particular fee was introduced. So there's a lot of little things that exist there now, which the parties can, in a sense, work through and almost return back to the status quo ante. Fentanyl's obviously the other one. China is of the view that it's gone out of its way in terms of addressing some of the supply side concerns that the United States has. There may or may not be a little bit more effort done on that front. And the sad thing is that I don't think the problem's a supply side problem. We've had 50 years of war on drugs now coming out of Washington, which has always been about tackling the supply side, and yet opioid addiction in the United States, and overdoses and deaths have continued to rise. So clearly the strategic framework's been wrong. It hasn't actually worked. But, there you go. This is, an obsession. I understand why the United States government is concerned about fentanyl. It should be. But it's looking for a solution in the wrong place. But that's a different story.
When I hear guests like dealing with China issues talk this way, I always think to myself, and not just on China, Russia, Iran, etc. I often think to myself that how does a country that believes in win-win relationships deal with a group of sociopaths? Like, meaning we don't believe in win-win relationships. We believe in zero sum. And when Trump is going into that meeting, I guarantee you, Donald Trump is thinking of, how can I get an advantage? How can I get leverage? How can I win? Whereas China's going into that meeting thinking, how can we both win? I am always fascinated by that relationship. It's like somebody who plays Go versus somebody who plays chess. It's a clash of ideologies in the way that these things are being worked out. I mean, we'll see. I suppose we'll see. I mean, ultimately, I agree with you. But your thing is, there's not going to be, and we can close it on this, there's not going to be a broad trade deal set. If anything, they're going to deal with smaller.
Jamal. Look, I suspect not, partly because there hasn't been the time necessary for that to happen. The second thing is, and I'm just trying to interpret the ways in which the negotiators from both sides have commented on the discussions. The Chinese side has talked about a framework and a common and a initial consensus again. The American side has sort of talked about we're getting closer to an agreement. So none of that suggests anything other than some signposts. Now, they're not unimportant, but there simply is insufficient time, I think, for a comprehensive reconfiguration of the trading relationships to be documented and dealt with. When you're dealing with trade deals, they take months. Some trade deals can take decades to nut out. In fact, I read in the news today that a country in Southeast Asia and somebody else, just slipped my mind at the moment, concluded a trade deal that had been in negotiations for a decade. Right. So, there's because it's very detailed. If you look at the categories of goods, they're not broad brushed. They literally go down to 4 numbers. These are very granular descriptions of products, and trade deals go line by line, item by item. And so I don't think that that's the kind of discussions that the United States and China has been actually having. And so I don't think we're going to get that kind of deal.
Status quo.
Yeah, it's just 2 days of discussions does not deliver that kind of outcome. They're trying to solve, in a sense, the deal makers and the deal breakers, so that there is the space then for the work to be done at that sort of more operational level. But if you can't solve the deal makers and breakers, then you're never going to get to that next stage. So that's where I think they're at. They're trying to tackle these, things that could put a spanner in the works or can smooth a process going forward. A lot of it will involve winding things back to pre-2nd of April, status quo ante, that's where I think we're at. That's perhaps not a bad outcome. It's 6 months on. We'll go full circle. There's been a test of strength in a sense, and I think it's probably fair to say that the United States overestimated what it was bringing to this particular set of negotiations.
Oh, that's an understatement. That's an understatement. Warwick, man, like I say, I always learn something in these conversations. Thank you for this. Warwick Powell. I'm Warwick Powell. He's adjunct professor for Queensland University of Technology, chairman of Smart Trade Networks and Group Companies, and president of Data Integrity and Supply Chains Association. Warwick, you are fantastic. Thank you for this, man. You be safe, okay?
You too. Appreciate your time.
All right. And I see the two debaters in the background. Let me bring both of them in. Gentlemen, how are you doing today? You doing all right?
Good, thank you. Good morning.
Good.
Is my am I on?
Yeah, you're on. I can hear you.
Hold a second.
You okay? You good? Daniel, can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. How you doing, Daniel? You doing all right?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay. We're all set. Everything's functioning okay.
Yes, we're all set. Okay, let me introduce both of you. So we have Dimitri Lascaris.
But I can't hear you tomorrow.
Oh, you can't hear me. Why can't you hear me? Dimitri, can you hear me?
What's going on here?
Yes.
Should
Okay,
I
so Dimitri
reload
can
or
hear-
what?
No, I can hear you, but you can't hear me.
Hold on. Give me a
Hold on.
second. I'm sorry, guys.
Okay. Daniel is going to get his mic straight, but while he gets it straight, Dimitri Lascaris, he's a lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. Dimitri runs the show Reason to Resist. Definitely check him out on YouTube. He has a fantastic channel, and he has been a damn good friend of the show. And I've immensely appreciated him, this contribution. Daniel Lazare, he's an independent journalist, author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Frozen Republic, The Velvet Coup, and America's Undeclared War. And you can check his content out on DH Lazare on Twitter. He also has a column on permanentrevolution.org and daniellazare.substack.com. Daniel will be back. Oh, there we are. Daniel, can you hear me now?
I hear you fine. Sorry about that.
Excellent. No, you're perfectly fine. You're perfectly fine.
Good.
Welcome to the show, guys. I am glad both of you can join me. There was a bit of a kerfuffle between you two. Daniel went after a perspective that Dimitri had. A debate eventually came up as something that both of these guys wanted to hash out. So let's do it that way. And we have two questions on this debate. The first question, well, I just get both questions. One is the future of Gaza, and the other one has to do with whether or not this is a genocide. And I guess there's a bit of leeway in that conversation. So let's start with that. And Dimitri, I'm going to let you start with this because this was specifically your question. Each of you got to do a question. Give me your take on this. Is this a genocide? And if so, how do you come to that conclusion? Meaning, how do you define genocide in a way where you can define what is taking place? Meaning hundreds of thousands of people dead, buried under the rubble, not to mention the people who they were able to record, starvation, etc. Give me your take on this, Dimitri. Let's start with you.
Well, this is quintessentially a legal question. Let me, first of all, thank you for organizing this, Jamal, and for approaching this whole subject with the frame of mind that the best way to resolve these vitally important questions is through vigorous and open debate. And I also thank Daniel for joining us to have this conversation. So this is a legal question. This is often framed by defenders of Israel as a political one. It's not political. It's certainly not how I approach the question. I approach it as a lawyer, which is what I am. I've practiced for over 30 years. That doesn't mean my judgment is infallible. Hey, man, it's entirely possible some layperson who's really informed about the law might be able to educate me about this. But I think it is relevant that it's a legal question, and I'm a lawyer. And as a matter of fact, on behalf of 2 Palestinian Canadians, I'm currently prosecuting a claim against the Canadian government for violating the Genocide Convention by not preventing and punishing genocide in Gaza. I should also mention that the human rights experts, and again, this is not definitive. I came here to have a debate and not foreclose it by invoking these experts, but the experts who have opined that Israel is committing genocide include Amnesty International, which is based in the UK, Human Rights Watch based in the United States, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, the wonderful Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, another Israeli human rights group, Physician for Human Rights Israel, and most recently, the UN Independent Commission of Inquiry on the Occupied Palestinian Territories. And this is not an exhaustive list. I also want to mention that I was in Palestine during the genocide. I went to the West Bank. I spent quite a bit of time there in the Jenin and Tulkarm refugee camps. I went to the border of Gaza, spent hours there observing what I could because I couldn't get in. And I've spoken to dozens of Palestinians who either live in the occupied territories or have family members there. So my legal opinion is based upon all of this evidence and more. So the starting point is Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, to which Israel is a party. And it says, in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. And the jurisprudence, there is extensive jurisprudence of international tribunals, including the ICJ, interpreting this. When they say in whole or in part in the Genocide Convention, it doesn't have to be a majority. It has to be a material part of the population. So what are the acts they have to commit to be guilty of genocide? Any one of the following categories of acts suffices, but in Israel's case, at least 4 out of 5 apply. A, killing members of the group. B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. There's another one about transferring children, but I'm going to leave that aside because I think it's a slam dunk that Israel has committed the first 4. And as I say, you only need to commit 1. Now, since October 7th, Israeli forces have killed 543 aid workers in Gaza. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, Israel has killed 241 journalists in Gaza, injured 162 and imprisoned 92, and it won't let the international media in to see the results of its handiwork. Earlier this month, the UN Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said Israel has killed over 1,500 healthcare workers. It has also imprisoned dozens of them in conditions amounting to torture. The vast majority of Gaza's hospitals have been damaged or destroyed. Numerous doctors from outside of Palestine who have served in Gaza have recounted how they found medical equipment that was completely non-threatening, but in fact was life-saving, that had been destroyed intentionally by Israeli forces who entered the hospital by, for example, shooting the medical equipment full of holes. So we could go on and on about the acts, but I don't think, I would be very surprised if Daniel wants to deny that Israel has committed those acts. I suspect that where the debate will happen, and this is generally what happens when you talk about this allegation of genocide against Israel, is around the question of intent. And that's the last thing I want to mention here. The wonderful Palestinian human rights organization Al-Haq has created a database of statements of genocidal intent by Israeli leaders. And there are other organizations that have done this as well. It's not just Al-Haq. So I'm just going to give you a tiny sample. Yoav Gallant, defense minister at the time, he made this statement October 9, 2023. We are imposing a complete siege on Gaza, no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly. Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Minister of National Security on November 11, 2023, quote, to be clear, when they say that Hamas needs to be eliminated, it also means those who sign, those who support, and those who distribute candy. All of these are terrorists and must be eliminated. Amichai Eliyahu, Heritage Minister, November 1st, 2023, the north of the Strip, more beautiful than ever, blowing up and flattening everything, simply a delight for the eyes. Nassim Vaturi, Deputy Speaker of the Knesset, October 7, 2023. Now we all have one common goal, erasing the Gaza Strip from the face of the earth. Those who are unable will be replaced. Giora Eland, Reservist Major General, former head of Israeli National Security and advisor to the Defense Minister in October and November 2023. And here are just a couple of his doozies. Quote, water comes from wells with salt water unfit for consumption. They have water treatment plants. Israel should hit those plants. When the entire world says we have gone insane and this is a humanitarian disaster, we will say it's a means, close quote. And finally, he said this, quote, who are the poor women of Gaza? They are all the mothers, sisters, or wives of Hamas murderers. On the one hand, they are part of the infrastructure that supports the organization. And on the other hand, if they experience a humanitarian disaster, then it can be assumed that some of the Hamas fighters and the more junior commanders will begin to understand that the war is futile. The international community warns us of a humanitarian disaster in Gaza and of severe epidemics. We must not shy away from this. As difficult as that may be, after all, severe epidemics in the south of the Gaza Strip will bring victory closer. I could go on and on. This is a tiny sample. If you want, we can talk about this for hours. But in my opinion, it is beyond reasonable doubt that Israel is committing genocide. It has the requisite intent. I think it's not even hiding that fact at this stage. And I find it mind-boggling that anybody purporting to be a journalist would deny this at this stage.
Daniel, I mean, do you disagree with that premise? I mean, I read the article you sent.
Yeah.
And it seemed like you were making the argument more so that genocide it's a buzzword, but it's difficult to define, or the definition is hazy.
Yeah. But first of all, I don't disagree with any of the facts that Dimitri has recited. I think the situation in Gaza is horrible. Israel has waged an aggressive, overwhelming war that has caused vast human suffering. And I think that Zionism itself is an ideology of Jewish supremacy, which is essentially racist to all non-Jews who come under Israeli jurisdiction or domination. And as such, it makes, it's simply a fly in the ointment. It simply is a disruptive influence that impedes any kind of progress towards democracy in the Middle East. And I think it's an extremely negative force. So I quite agree with him there. But I don't want to quarrel over the question of intent, because my point is a little bit different with regard to genocide. And by the way, I appreciate that Dimitri is a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but I've written 3 books about the law, about the US Constitution. And I know that you can't merely apply the law. You've got to assess the law. And the UN Genocide Convention, in my assessment, is simply incoherent. The phrase intent to destroy in whole or in part simply does not make any sense. And by the way, the history of genocide is fascinating. The term was invented by a right-wing Zionist, of all people, named Raphael Lemkin, who essentially mounted he lost 50 members of his extended family to the Nazis. He was a Polish Jew who escaped by the skin of his teeth to Scandinavia and eventually made his way to the US, where he mounted a one-man campaign to get genocide made the law of the world, and succeeded quite handsomely. But the idea is incoherent. Destroy, intent to destroy in whole or part. Intent,
wait, real quick, why is that inherent? Why is that incoherent?
Because intent to destroy doesn't mean that the intent matters or the destruction matters. If your intent is to destroy the Palestinians, the Jews, et cetera, is the intent what counts, even if you don't kill a single person? If it's destroy, does destroy mean physically, economically, et cetera, et cetera? Is there a threshold? Hitler only succeeded in killing 35% of world Jewry. He did kill about 80% of European Jewry. But what is the threshold? And in fact, Samantha Power, in her book, A Problem from Hell, which essentially put genocide on the map and enabled the neocons to use genocide to involve, to justify all kinds of military interventions in the Middle East, in the Balkans as well. Samantha Power admitted that the lack of a threshold meant that there was great leeway in terms of the military powers on when to intervene or not. In other words, the US could intervene in a country where a genocide was going on, even though the violence was relatively small scale. If the US perceived there was intent to commit genocide, then it could send troops in. It was an all-purpose motivation for military intervention. And essentially, the incoherence means that almost anything can be labeled a genocide. For example, Hamas invaded Israel on October 7th, 2023, killed 1,200 people, most of them civilians, merely because they were Israeli. Ghazi Hamad, a Hamas spokesman, 2 weeks later vowed that they would do 2, 3, 4, as many October 7th as they could. Now, according to the UN definition, this is genocide. The vow to keep on killing Israelis, if you accept that UN genocide fits the definition perfectly. So what do we have here? We have 2 genocides going on. And how does that help us understand the situation? I mean, who isn't guilty of genocide? Was the Soviet Red Army guilty of genocide when they poured 2 million rounds of artillery into central Berlin, starting on April 22nd, 1945? Was the U.S. and Britain guilty of genocide when they carried out fire bombings of Hamburg and Dresden? On and on and on and on. The term is essentially meaningless. And a movement which essentially bases itself on a single incoherent word is a movement that is going nowhere. And in fact, it has gone nowhere. Israel has carried on with complete disregard to international opinion. The anti-Zionist movement has not impeded the Israeli military effort one bit, and the plight of the Palestinians in Gaza has gone from bad to nightmarish. So this movement has failed because it's based on a very simplistic idea, which may impress fellow lawyers, but does not impress the world of politics. That's it.
Okay. I'm not in this debate. I'm going to give this to Dimitri.
Okay.
Dimitri, go ahead.
Well, this is a new one. I haven't heard this argument before, but I'll give you my immediate reaction. Daniel said, as I understand his position, that the concept of genocide is incoherent because there's no threshold. That's just not true. There is a threshold, and I said it at the outset. The threshold is a material part of the population, the group that's being targeted. Now, you can say, well, material is ambiguous. Sure it is. That leaves the court a significant degree of judgment. But this concept, Daniel, is, it's literally all over the law. So I'll just give you an example. I in much of my career, I started on Wall Street. I was a securities lawyer. And the fundamental concept that we had to deal with as securities lawyers when talking about whether information, a misrepresentation was actionable, was the question of materiality. And we had to get into a discussion about whether this particular type of information would have a material impact on the stock price. And courts all over the United States, all the way up to the US Supreme Court for decades, have been applying the concept of materiality. And so have courts throughout the West. And they've been doing this in a variety of contexts outside of securities law and genocide. So this is a threshold. It is eminently capable of being interpreted by wise courts with a certain degree of flexibility. And I think that that's what the drafters of the Genocide Convention wanted. They wanted to give the court some flexibility in applying the definition instead of saying you have to wipe out 3.5% of the population or something like that. So it's just not true that there's no threshold, and the threshold that's in there. But
Dimitri, that's why they liked it.
Daniel, there's a number of other points you made, and I'm happy to let you respond. But I do want to just quickly respond to your other points. You said, you went on about Hamas, committing genocide. I thought we came here to debate whether Israel's committing genocide, my friend. So I'm not going to get sucked into that debate. But for the record, I think your analysis of Hamas's conduct, to the extent you're suggesting it meets the definition of genocide, I think is preposterous. But I'm not here to have that debate. You said that the movement is based on a single word. What movement are you talking about here? What movement are you talking about here? There has been a Palestinian solidarity movement that has existed for decades, and it has invoked a number of legal principles that Israel has savagely violated again and again. For example, our movement was saying for years prior to October 7, 2023, that Israel was committing the crime of apartheid against the Palestinian people. And as Noam Chomsky noted, its form of apartheid is much worse than the one that was inflicted upon the Black population of South Africa. I could give you a list of organizations that said as much. Are you going to say that apartheid is incoherent now for some reason? We were saying that Israel was committing the crime of collective punishment. We were saying that Israel was committing the crime of arbitrary arrest and detention and extrajudicial assassinations. We were saying that Israel was committing the crime of torture, and including, as B'Tselem found, the torture of Palestinian children in detention. What word are you talking about? Israel has violated the entire range of human rights obligations and principles of human decency, and we've been invoking all of them all these years. And the reason why the movement has not yet succeeded in achieving liberation for the Palestinian people is because your government, the government of the United States, does not give a damn about any of these things. That's the problem.
First of all, Dimitri, it's not my government. I am opposed to this government. I am a Marxist. I'm completely opposed to the U.S. government in every way, shape, or form. Number one. Number two, we are here to discuss genocide, if I'm not correct. And you recited a list of examples of exterminationist rhetoric by various Israeli politicians. And of course, I don't challenge your facts at all. But in July 2020, the head of the Hamas women's movement told a rally in Gaza, quote, "This is our fate, my beloved sisters, to be Allah's hand on earth, the hand that will finish off the Israelites, this Zionist enemy, Allah willing. Allah brought them here in droves so that Palestine becomes their graveyard, Allah willing." 3 years later, a Hamas religious official named Hamad al-Rageb declared in a Friday sermon, "O Allah, bring annihilation upon the Jews, paralyze them, destroy their entity, tear them apart, and bring upon them a terrible punishment. O Allah, enable us to get to the necks of the Jews." In June 2023, wait, let me finish. That's 4 months prior to October 7th.
Please, I'm sorry. Please.
An Islamic scholar named Hussein Qassem declared on Hamas's official TV station, quote, "The Jews are not the enemies of the Palestinians alone. They are the enemies of humanity as a whole, and the enemies of every monotheist in the world. Why shouldn't we be furious? Why shouldn't we burn the ground under the Jews' feet?" Now, this is all I'm saying is that the word genocide is so elastic that it applies equally to both sides. So if you have two genocidal parties in conflict with one another, how does the word genocide illuminate the problem? I mean, I think that the problem with Dimitri is that he is approaching this in an exclusively legalistic way, which is a very limited way of seeing this conflict. And I think, therefore, his conclusions are misleading and one-sided. He's not seeing the problem in its totality, and he's not seeing the inadequacy of this whole mode of analysis.
Daniel, let me ask a question on this one. I always say there's no such thing as neutrality in regards to media and the way that they look at events. If I am standing around, let's say at the time where the United States was committing a genocide against the Native Americans, and I was like, I tried to both sides, then I'm being unfair to the fact that basically I'm protecting one side in this. Do you accept that for all intents and purposes, you mentioned yourself that Zionism is a supremacist ideology? And let's say we were talking about the Nazis, and the Nazis were exterminating the Jews, and the Jews responded to that by attacking the Nazis. Let's say they were creating bands of groups that were attacking Germans as a response. You don't think that there's a difference between people who are responding to being an apartheid state or being oppressed or occupied, as opposed to the people who are doing the occupying? Because it sounds like you're equating both as if both are on equal terms. One group is responding. The other group is committing the atrocities. They are committing the apartheid or the occupation. You don't see a difference in those things.
Well, I do see a difference, and I see a similarity at the same time. I mean, I think it's. I think, first of all, the Jews, the Gaza has been compared to the Warsaw Ghetto, and I've actually done a fair amount of research on the Warsaw Ghetto. The Warsaw Ghetto fighters not only didn't attack Polish civilians, they had no intention of doing that, and their ideology was directly opposite. They put out newspapers in the ghetto in which they called for all peoples of Europe to rise up against the Nazis. They were expressing solidarity with ordinary Poles and Russians and ordinary Germans as well. Now, if the Warsaw Ghetto fighters had broken out of the ghetto and massacred 1,200 innocent Polish civilians, then yeah, we would have had to see that uprising in a very, very different light. But they didn't do that. Now, yes, you have a right to resist oppression, but you don't have a right to resist oppression in a stupid manner that merely mirrors the oppression that is being visited upon you. And you can others certainly have a right to criticize the tactics that are used in fighting oppression. So the whole genocide question just seems to completely cloud this issue up. But if the Warsaw Ghetto fighters had committed an atrocity of that sort, then yeah, we would have to criticize them. We would have to say, what the hell went wrong here?
Really? Okay, Dimitri, give me your take on that. I mean,
I'm curious to know. I have a few things to say, and I invite Daniel to respond to this question when I'm done. Are you saying that it clouded the issue to say that what the Nazis did to the Jewish people was a genocide? Would you take the same position with respect to the monstrosities committed by Europeans, not Palestinians, against the Jewish people? I mean, because if you're being intellectual, why would you take a different position with respect to the Holocaust against the Jewish people?
I'm not.
Okay, well,
I don't.
So let me though return. I'm glad. Thank you for your candor. I find that rather surprising. I have no hesitation at all in saying that what was done to the Jewish people was a genocide. That was a slam dunk, just like this one from a legal perspective. Now, I just want to say something else. You continuously want to move the conversation over to Hamas. I'm not going to get into it other than to say I disagree with you for a whole bunch of reasons. But I will say this, even if you're right that the leaders of Hamas have the requisite intent as it's defined under the Genocide Convention, no rational human being would think that Hamas has the ability to carry it out. Are you kidding me? Against a nuclear armed state that has 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs, Apache helicopters, F-35s, Merkava tanks, drones up the wazoo. They can mass murder people with complete impunity. And you think that there's a realistic threat that Hamas is going to actually be able to inflict upon the people of Israel a genocide? It's absolutely clear that they can't do it even if they wanted to. But Israel has ample ability to eviscerate, to annihilate the Palestinian people, as we've watched in horror. So that should be our primary concern right now. Let's deal with the practical reality, even if you're right, and I don't accept what you said. But the practical reality is there's one side here that can commit genocide and is doing so.
Well, then you are criticizing Hamas, because Hamas proclaimed its practical ability to mount successive October 7th. That's what God says.
Do you agree with them? Do you buy that they can do to Israel what Israel has done to Gaza? Come on, man.
But Dimitri, let me finish. I mean, Ghazi Hamad said, we have the capability. He said this.
But do you believe them? The question is, do you think everything Hamas leaders say is true? I doubt you do.
Under the UN Convention, it's intent. Ghazi Hamad announced his intent to carry out, Hamas's intent to carry out as many October 7th as was necessary.
Okay,
according Dimitri, let me finish.
Argument, Daniel. I'm willing to accept your characterization of his statements. You're not responding to my point. My point is, even if we accept your characterization of those statements, and by the way, I have criticized Hamas on a number of occasions. And if I too am a leftist, by the way, And I'm a secularist. On that basis alone, if I were a Palestinian, we can get into this in the second half, and I were living in the occupied territories, I would probably vote for somebody like, I don't know, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or maybe the PFLP, something like that. I wouldn't vote for any party that is explicitly oriented towards one religious belief.
You'd be killed, Dimitri.
No, I wouldn't.
Yes, you would be killed. You would be killed.
I was in Palestine last year after having vigorously, criticized Hamas. Ain't nobody laid a finger on me. But in any case, the point I'm making, and it's the one to which you have not responded, is irrespective of the intentions of Hamas leadership, they clearly do not have the capacity to commit a genocide, to wipe out the people, the Jewish population of Israel. They can't even come close to doing that. The number of people that and again, we won't get into it because it's a totally different subject. There's lots of evidence that they didn't kill 800 civilians, because as the Israeli media has uncovered, the Israeli military implemented the Hannibal Directive and brought to bear absolutely stunning amounts of munitions against the cars that were fleeing from the settlements and from the military bases into Gaza. But I'm willing to accept that some Palestinian militants killed some civilians, and I denounce that unequivocally. The fact of the matter is, though, that what they did on that day is a tiny fraction of what Israel can do and has done every day. So that's we should be concerned about reality, not about some, figment of imagination in the mind of a Hamas leader.
Dimitri, first of all, number one, I think this kind of denialism has been debunked many times over. I don't really want to go there. The famous footage of all those burned cars by the roadside was actually shot on October 8th, not October 7th. There's the denialist argument has been, I don't buy.
I'm not denying.
Let me finish.
I acknowledge that some Israeli civilians. I acknowledge it and I denounce it.
Now, there's no doubt that the Hamas strategy was a colossal failure, but the Hamas strategy, which flowed from the entire, Islamist Muslim Brotherhood ideology that underlies that organization, the Hamas strategy was to use October 7th to ignite an all Middle Eastern, all Muslim jihad against Israel. And if that strategy had been successful, then yes, it would have, raised the question, raised the possibility of the violent, extermination of the Israeli nation. Now, I agree with you totally that the strategy was fatally flawed from the beginning. There isn't remotely the basis for an all Muslim jihad against Israel. And I agree that that Hamas was living in a world, a world of its own illusory, development. But the fact is that was their intention. Now, and I certainly agree with you 100% that there is a vast power imbalance between Israel, backed by the U.S. with an unlimited supply of U.S. weapons, and a few thousand militias armed with militiamen are armed with automatic weapons in Gaza. A strip of territory, 25 miles long and up to 7.5 miles wide. That's like the size of the borough of Queens here in New York. So I agree with you totally that there is a vast power imbalance, which just speaks to the utterly flawed. I mean, almost the word should be almost insane aspect of the Hamas strategy, which has brought nothing but ruin, unimaginable ruin to the people of Gaza. Now, you don't want to criticize Hamas. That is the fatal flaw of this movement, because the Palestinian people are subject to dual oppression,
Daniel,
by Islamists and Zionism.
Daniel, just interrupt real quick. It seems that you don't accept, or at the very least, that you don't want to deal with the fact that Israel has murdered hundreds of thousands of people, and that you are focusing on this idea of Hamas said they wanted to do this. Well, Donald Trump says he's the best president, or that he's been told that he was the best president since Abraham Lincoln. Do you believe him? Meaning, just because somebody says something doesn't mean they have the capability to do exactly what they said. And again, we're also ignoring the fact that this is a group that is resisting as opposed to the other group that is oppressing. Meaning, people have the right under international law to resist. And I know you may say, well, they killed 1,200 people. Let's say they did. Let's say they did. He has already criticized them for doing so, saying, look, they shouldn't kill civilians. But many of these people that they took were soldiers. And the majority of the people who work in Israel are soldiers. So it's a prison break. And Israel turns around and murders hundreds of thousands, the overwhelming majority being women and children. And the question of whether or not this is a genocide is the thing that's of paramount. Regardless of what Hamas said they wanted to do, they obviously don't have the capability of doing it. Otherwise, hundreds of thousands of them would be massacred.
Well,
I mean, I guess my thing is, do you just not accept that? Or you're looking at this as, well, these are equal things, despite the fact that Israel has murdered this many people?
They're equal and they're not equal. I mean, first of all,
Whoa, what does that mean?
Well, let me explain, please. I mean, first of all, do I believe Hamas could have carried that out? No. Do I believe that Hamas believed it could carry it out? Yes. So yes. I think Hamas, that strategy was to ignite an all-Muslim jihad against Israel. That strategy failed abysmally, but that was their strategy. And I think it was a fatally flawed strategy, and which brought ruin to the people of Gaza. And the people of Gaza, where Hamas is vastly unpopular at this point, want a new leadership, and they are entitled to a new leadership. I mean, Japan thought it could defeat the U.S. by bombing Pearl Harbor. Okay, Japan's strategy was fatally flawed. I remember reading about. I remember reading about a Japanese kid in the summer of 1945, watching wave after wave of American bombers pass overhead. He was in some small village on their way to Tokyo, wherever it was, and he said, what kind of leadership would pick a battle with a vast industrial power like this? The incompetence was staggering. And those words, and those words, Jamal, apply just as much to Hamas. It's incompetence.
I would like to
think that everything you're saying is true.
We're running out of time, and I'd like to have an opportunity here. I do want to deal with the second question as well. Okay, so, I don't think that I don't accept that the goal was to ignite an Islamic jihad against the Jewish people. Yes, did Hamas want other peoples of the region and governments to come to the aid of the Palestinian people and to participate in a military confrontation with Israel's evil, barbaric regime? Yes, it did. But are you telling me that ultimately, if they had the intention of trying to wipe out through some Islamic, pan-jihad against the Jewish people in Israel, that they would have been able to carry it out when Israel is the only state in the entire Middle East that has nukes? Do you have any doubt in your mind that if such a jihad erupted, Israel would have hesitated to nuke the countries that were attacking it? It would have done so without hesitation. And I think they're richly aware of that fact, Daniel, which may have something to do with the fact that they didn't want to participate. But mostly it's about the fact, again, the American government, I'm glad to know that you renounce it, has installed one brutal, corrupt, washed-in vassal after another in the Arab world in order to impose its will upon the peoples of this resource-rich region. That's why it failed. But if it had gained any traction amongst these governments, Israel would have nuked the whole lot of them, and you know it. So even there, your theory falls apart.
Dimitri, I already agreed with you. I already agreed with you.
A lot of talking. I want to another thing. Okay,
I already agreed with you. Why are you arguing?
I'm going to read for you in the question of how many Israeli civilians were actually killed by Palestinian militants on October 7th from an ABC Australia news article published last year. This is not a pro-Palestine organization, as I'm sure you know. In July, it says, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz revealed commanders in the IDF gave the order to fire on troops who had been captured by Hamas, explicitly referencing the Hannibal Directive. One former Israeli officer, Air Force Colonel Nof Eretz, told the Haaretz podcast the directive was not specifically ordered, but was apparently applied in responding air crews, panicked, operating without their normal command structure and unable to coordinate with the ground forces. They fired on vehicles returning to Gaza, knowing they were likely carrying hostages. Quote, this was a mass Hannibal. It was tons and tons of openings in the fence and thousands of people in every type of vehicle, some with hostages and some without, Colonel Haaretz said. Air Force pilots described to Yedioth Ahronot newspaper, an Israeli newspaper, the firing of, quote, tremendous amounts of ammunition October 7th at people attempting to cross the border. 28 fighter helicopters shot over the course of the day, all of the ammunition in their bellies in renewed runs to rearm. We are talking about hundreds of 30 millimeter cannon mortars and Hellfire missiles, reporter Yoav Zaytoun said. This is from the Israeli media. This is from sources inside the Israeli military. This is not denialism. We don't know how many civilians were killed by Israeli military forces, but based on what we do know, it was a lot more than one or two. And it may well have constituted the majority of the civilians who died on that day. That is
absurd. Al Jazeera did a half-an-hour documentary on October 7th in mid-2024, in which they examined various what might be called friendly fire incidents. And they found at most a dozen incidents, and most of those were highly questionable. What this is referring to by people, reports of Israeli helicopters firing machine guns at vehicles heading back into Gaza. Well, all that would suggest is that that the killing on the ground in Israel itself had already been completed. There's famous footage showing dozens of burnt out vehicles, but that which has made the rounds on the internet as supposed proof of the so-called Hannibal directive. But that footage has been shown to have been shot on October 8th, not October 7th. I don't think it's fruitful to get into a debate over denialism. Here, it's too far afield. It'll lead us into an evidentiary labyrinth.
Okay, so
but let me finish. But Dimitri, before you were arguing with me, but I agreed with you. I mean, I agreed that the hopes of a pan-Muslim jihad were delusional. I agree that Hamas did not have the capability, not remotely, to meet Israel on the battlefield on equal terms. And I agree with you that if somehow a pan-Islamic jihad had materialized, Israel would have responded with every ounce of firepower in its arsenal, and that includes the 50 nukes or so that it supposedly has. I agree that the U.S. has installed one barbaric regime after another in the Middle East, though I don't want to absolve the Middle Eastern nations of responsibility as well. But I don't know why you're trying to pick an argument with me, because I'm agreeing with you at every turn. I'm sorry.
It just seems like. Well, just to interrupt real quick. It just seems like if you agree with that, then you kind of agree that Hamas didn't have the capability of doing, meaning just because they said it, they didn't do it. Then the whole argument of genocide for Hamas falls apart.
But tomorrow, the Genocide Convention says intent. Doesn't say the actual ability. It says intent. If my intent is to wipe out every last member of X group, then according to the UN Convention, if I take any action on the basis of that intent, I am guilty of genocide, even before I've harmed a single hair on the single head of a single member of that group. The Genocide Convention is a meaningless, incoherent term, a neologism cooked up by a emotionally disturbed right-wing Zionist named Raphael Lemkin. And
but starvation
doesn't make any sense.
Just be clear, though, starvation is not an intent; it's an action.
Oh.
Okay, sorry.
But the convention says intent.
I only have 12 minutes left, and I really do want to, because this was what precipitated this whole debate, were claims that Daniel made on your program about the popular will of the Palestinian people. I think it's very important that we address that in the little time remaining to us. Can we do that?
Yes.
Yeah, let's do that. And let's hit that under the context of the future of Hamas, of Gaza.
Right.
Let's go with that. And Dimitri, I'll let you start.
Because I've had the opportunity to educate myself about some of Daniel's writings on the subject. So if I may, I'd like to take a few minutes and lay out my position. Is that okay?
Please. Yes.
Okay. So I just want to, again, be clear. I think Daniel and I are both, we've been very clear that we think that the Palestinian people should have a democracy, a robust democracy, and they should exercise democratic rights. So I'm curious, I frankly a little bit wary of the idea that Daniel is willing to take that principle to its logical conclusion when it comes to the Palestinian people, for reasons I'm going to lay out. But I think we both agree on the general principle that there should be democracy in occupied Palestine. And as I said, I wouldn't vote for a party that's explicitly religious or conservative in nature. I'm a leftist and I am an atheist. So that would be ruled out from the get-go with any party of that political orientation. Now, here in the West, it's very clear we do not brook any suggestion that foreign powers can dictate to us who will govern us. In the United States and Canada, right across the West for the last decade, we've watched this pathetic hysteria about alleged Russian and Chinese interference in the politics of Western countries. So we would never countenance the idea that foreigners can say, hey, you know what, Joe Biden and Donald Trump and the establishments of the parties they represent committed genocide in Gaza. They've committed countless other crimes. Therefore, you, the American people, you may not vote for Republicans. You can't vote for Democrats. These people can't run for political office. Americans would never tolerate that for 1 second. And if you believe in human equality, you would say the same thing about Palestinians. Palestinians can't be dictated to about who can run for political office in Palestine, who can govern them, whatever we may think about the choices that they make. Now, in an article in May of this year, this gets to the question of who would they choose if they were given the opportunity to choose freely. In an article in May of this year, Daniel cited the very poll that you and I talked about, Jamal, the last time I was on your program, by that Palestinian polling agency. If you want to get the exact name for him, it's in Daniel's article. And in the article, Daniel cites it for only one purpose. And he says it's a very credible and reputable polling agency. And the purpose for which he cites it is to show that a minority of people living in Gaza, 38% or 37%, now believe, it was a majority before, now believe that the October 7th attacks were the correct decision. And that something in the range of, I think, 46% disagree with that contention. Okay. But as we discussed, Jamal, on your program, there's a lot more information in that poll than just the attitude of people in Gaza to the decision to attack Israel on October 7th. And by the way, Daniel didn't mention not only that information, he didn't mention that the overall view in occupied Palestine, including the West Bank, about the correctness of the decision to attack on October 7th is 50% believe it was and 40% oppose. Because in the West Bank, a substantial majority think it was the correct decision. But that's not what I want to focus on. Daniel said it, when he spoke to you, that if there were an election held today in Gaza, Hamas would lose by a margin of 10-1. And his May 22nd article, he began it with these words: if Gaza by some miracle were to hold free elections tomorrow, there isn't the slightest doubt what the results would be. Hamas would be out in a flash. So what does the poll, which Daniel referenced in that very article by this very credible polling agency in Palestine, actually say? It says, first of all, that 87% of Palestinians reject the claim that Hamas committed the atrocities alleged against them on October 7th. Furthermore, that same poll asked Palestinians for whom they would vote if there were a presidential election, and they found that if Marwan Barghouti, who is languishing in a tortuous dungeon of Israel for over 20 years, if he were allowed to run, he would get 50% of the vote. The Hamas leader Khalid Mishal would get 35%, and Abbas would get a lowly 11%. But if they also asked what would happen if Barghouti is not available to run, in a two-way race, Mishal would crush Abbas, 68% to 25% for Abbas. Fourth, when asked which political party or movement they support, the largest percentage, 32%, said they prefer Hamas, followed by Fatah, 21%. 12% selected third parties, and 34% said they do not support any of them or do not know. And 77% said they oppose the disarming of Hamas, which means, based on these numbers, that there are a lot of people in occupied Palestine who would not vote for Hamas, either in presidential elections or legislative elections, but who demand that it be allowed to retain its weapons. That is the democratic will and preference of the Palestinian people. And whatever I think about them, I would stand for their decision because they have every right to determine their own destiny, just as we do. So my question to you, Daniel, I'd appreciate if you could address it in time remaining to us, is if there were an election and you're wrong and this poll is right and the Hamas were to win, would you support that decision? Would you say, I'm not in the sense that you'd support Hamas, but would you say, as I do, that Israel and foreign governments cannot dictate that choice and must respect the will of the Palestinian people?
Yes.
Well, I don't know that we're...
Is that the end of the discussion? Yes, the answer is yes. I don't think that would happen, but the answer is yes.
Well, okay. Well,
yes,
what do you say about the polling that you yourself described as credible and reputable?
Dimitri, let me finish. If you have democracy and the results don't turn out the way you would like them to do, and that has been my personal experience for about 99% of my life, you have to respect the outcome. I quite agree. I don't think that would happen, but the name of the group, by the way, is the Palestine Center for Public Opinion. They're an extremely reputable group. And in a recent poll in early October of 301 Gazans, 71% said both sides had lost the war, and 64% cited, quote, widespread destruction and suffering with no political gains, unquote, as the reason. Now, I don't think that if 64% say the war got nowhere, I doubt very strongly that that 64% would vote for a continuation of the same old leadership which brought the war on.
Well, let me
just, Dimitri, but if they did, I would have to respect that vote, assuming all the democratic niceties were followed. But I don't think they would.
Sorry, who did that poll, Daniel?
Yeah, that poll was by the same group you cited before. That was the Palestine Center for Public Opinion.
Okay, so we both agree that that's a reputable firm. So yes. My response to you is that, and at the end of the day, this is really sort of beside the point, because the only way to find out is to let the Palestinian people have an election and to keep our damn noses out of it.
Could I say one thing?
But hold on a second.
Yeah.
Let me suggest to you why they might still vote for Hamas, because they might blame the corrupt, brutal, savage Arab autocrats for betraying them. They might say, yeah, it was a failure, but it wasn't because of Hamas that it's a failure. A lot of them would say it's because of those savage tyrants, those vassals of Washington. They might say, that we underestimated the brutality of Israel. We never imagined that it would go this far. They might say, despite my being unhappy with the outcome, there are reasons why I will nonetheless vote for Hamas. For example, because I am a devout Muslim and I appreciate their embrace of the values of Islam. Who knows? The question you just recited to us is not the question that matters. The question that matters is, if you were allowed to vote in a free and fair election, how would you vote? The most recent evidence available, which isn't that old, from May of this year, shows clearly that Hamas would thrash Fatah in both legislative and presidential elections. And the only case in which they would lose is if Marwan Barghouti were freed. And by the way, I would love to see Marwan Barghouti freed and to stand election in Palestine.
Okay. I'm not sure what we're arguing about. I mean, we both believe in democratic elections, and yes, it's possible that Hamas would win. I think it's extremely unlikely. And if there was an election, I would hope the choice would not be limited to Fatah or Hamas. I would hope that there would be a left-wing socialist alternative, because I believe that is the only way out of this conflict. But yeah, if there was a democratic election, I would earnestly hope that socialists would prevail. As to whether they would prevail or not, I don't know, but I would certainly hope they would. But we agree on the need. Hamas has not had said okay to an election since 2006. There were demonstrations in favor of elections, which Hamas sent its goons out to smash.
They won those elections.
And
they won those elections. Why
no,
should
they won in 2006. There were subsequent protests in favor of new elections, which Hamas repressed.
When
Now,
and where?
Oh, good.
When is the last time
they were in Gaza, I believe, in 2011.
Daniel, when is the last time there was an election in the West Bank?
There has not been an election, and when was the last? Israel has held 5 elections,
and it's
5 parliamentary elections
of the Palestinian
2022. Okay.
No, I'm talking about
now. Israel's held 5 elections since 2022. Now, I'm not trying to point to Israel as a paragon of democracy, but I'm showing that a party like Hamas, which has not agreed to elections for close to 20 years, is a dictatorship. One which weighs more and more heavily on the Palestinian people.
What I'm getting at is, when is the last time the Palestinian Authority had an election?
Oh, I'm not defending the Palestinian Authority, Jamal.
I know, but you're going after Hamas saying they haven't had an election, and I'm pointing out that there wasn't one in the West Bank. I haven't forgotten how long.
Look, the overarching reason for the lack of an election is because Israel and the United States don't want one. And they don't want one because the last time it happened, Hamas won. That's the reason there haven't been any elections in occupied Palestine.
If Hamas had wanted to have an election in Gaza alone, it could have done that. It didn't. For 20 years, there has not been an election. I mean, give me a break, Dimitri. Come on. You're facing a far right dictatorship. You should not be apologizing for.
Again, I'm not accepting your characterization of what Hamas wants, but I do know this much, that Hamas believes that occupied Palestine is an integrated whole, and they reject any notion that Gaza should be governed separately from the West Bank. So if you're right that they opposed an election, it's only because, in my opinion, the most likely explanation is it would have just legitimized this idea that Gaza and the West Bank are distinct and that they should have 2 separate governments, which at the end of the day, Daniel, what really matters here, and I've got to go, unfortunately, I have another interview in 2 minutes, is that the Palestinian people will be allowed to decide and that we respect their choice. And it sounds like we agree on that.
Dimitri, this is a far right dictatorship. Why are you making excuses for them?
I'm not making it. I'm telling you that
you are making excuses for them. You are making excuses for why they have not held an election in Gaza. You are making excuses. You are acting as a lawyer in Hamas's behalf. Why
I don't believe
are you doing that?
Sorry, I'm about to do another interview on RT, so I need to go. I'm sorry about that. But if you want to continue this discussion, by the way, happy to do so.
I'm delighted to also.
Dimitri, thank you for this. Daniel, thank you for this. I appreciate both of you for being able to come on the show and have this kind of conversation. Dimitri, I know you have to go, so I'm going to let you go. You be safe.
Take care.
Thank you for this, man. And Daniel, again, also, I want to thank you for joining and coming on to have this conversation. And just for the audience, just to give the everybody's bio, Dimitri Lascaris, lawyer, journalist, activist. He runs the show, Reason to Resist. He has a great show. Check him out. Daniel Lazare, independent journalist, author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution and American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Frozen Republic, Velvet Coup, America's Undeclared War. You can check him out on Twitter at DHLazare. You can find his columns on permanentrevolution.org and Daniel Lazare, that's Substack.com. Daniel, thank you for this, man.
Thank you.
You be safe. Have a good one.
Same to you.
All right. We have one more guest that will be coming up shortly. It is very difficult to be a moderator. It's very difficult, man, because obviously I have a point of view of this, and ultimately you just want to kind of let both have the conversation. I can do a poll. They say I can do a poll. How can I do a poll? I don't know how to do a poll. Let's see. Hold on. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can do that, especially if the audience wants it. Ray, give me 1 second. I'm coming to you now. I think that's the thing about debates. Everybody is usually pissed off at each other at the end of the debate. Okay, this and Ray, I'm coming to you 1 second. Give me one moment. I'm trying to do something for the audience. This, and I think this. All right. And so there should be some kind of way of okay, I don't see how to do that. Oh, wait, here we are. There we are. Okay. There we are. All right. Okay. All right. This is on the fly. Let me bring in Ray. How you doing, Ray? You doing okay? Oh, can you hear me okay?
Can't hear you.
You still can't hear me? You can't hear me? Can't hear me? I am active. I am on. And my volume is good. Check your...
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
I
But
can't
you
hear
can't
you. I don't have any.
Let's see. I don't think that's coming from me. And the audience can hear me. Audience, can you guys hear me? 1 second. Audience, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, audience? Okay, the audience can hear me, so that's not coming from me. Let me see. Audio's on, that's fine. Okay, Ray, sign out and sign back in and see if that works. Okay. All right, Ray, I'm gonna let him check his stuff before. That could be a speaker issue. In fact, let me send him an email. Give me 1 second, guys. We're gonna work this out. This. Yeah, that's not coming from me. Okay, let's try it now. How about now? Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? You still can't hear me? Ah, what is going on?
Way over there.
Ray, you still can't hear me?
Don't know.
What check check your I don't know how to, you can't hear me.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear
me
you.
now? Yeah, you can hear
hear
me. I can't hear
Yeah.
you. Okay, let's see. Okay, let's see here. Camera.
Yeah, check.
Everyone can see and hear me, but I can't
Yes.
hear you. Oh, wait a second. Settings. Audio, camera, audio.
How about
MacBook
now?
Air, microphone.
How about now?
Browser
How about
not supported for background noise removal. That's all right. Stereo, automatically adjust. Okay.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Hear me now?
Yes,
Wow.
I can hear you. You still can't
You
hear
can
me?
hear me. I can't. I can't hear you. Damn.
Okay. Check. Are your speakers active? Oh, you can't hear me, so there's no way to be. Okay.
How about now? Can you hear
I
me?
can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you perfectly fine.
Okay, I can hear you. Oh, what's you got here? MacBook Air microphone, audio. All right. Reduce mic background noise. All right. Stereo audio, echo camera. Automatically adjust mic volume. Mic volume. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Yeah, you
I can hear you.
can. I can't hear you.
Okay. All right.
One more try here.
Okay.
Okay, camera. MacBook Air camera. Camera. Okay. All right. If advanced, that's good. Audio.
Yeah, I can hear you loud and
MacBook
clear.
Air microphone. Okay, that's good. Echo cancellation. Get that off. All right. That's stereo audio. Automatically mic volume settings. Okay. No. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Your volume has gone down. Check. Right, sign out the back in.
Okay.
Wait, sign out and sign back in. Right, there we are. All right, we're going to see if that works. Yeah, his speaker volume turned down. See, turn the speaker volume down. Hopefully, it works when he comes back on. Look, I appreciate both Dimitri and Daniel for doing that. Look, there's a difference to me between a group that is resisting oppression versus the group that is committing oppression. If the Nazis are subjugating Jews, Russians, Poles, etc., and those groups respond in force, it is a bit wild to me to look at both and say these things are equal. One group is responding. There's a difference in those things.
Hear me now.
Okay. How about now? Can you hear me? Yes.
I can't hear you.
You still can't hear me. I don't know what it could be.
Well, I'd be happy if people can hear me. I'd be happy to hold forth for a little while, hoping that you would be able to be heard by me.
Well, your volume is down though. Your
invited
volume.
to the show. Okay, here we go.
Wait.
Everyone can see and hear you.
Yeah. Let me see. Hold on. Okay.
MacBook Air microphone. Got it.
Your volume is down.
Can you hear me now? No.
I can't, but your volume.
Okay,
That's
one more
weird.
try here.
Recheck
MacBook
the
Air
chat.
microphone. Got it.
What the hell?
Mic volume. Audio. Can you hear me?
I can, but
Yeah,
your volume.
I can't hear you. Put the...
Let me see. Email. Check. Speaker. see. Where the volume is going to be different. Oh, that doesn't make sense. Sometimes it can be sent to a different output. Right, check your email. I'm sorry, guys. Give us 1 second. We're trying to work this out. Okay, now Ray, I can't hear you. Check your email. Check your email. This. Okay. Ray, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with this. Turn your yeah. Wait, can you call me? Can you call me? Can you call me? Ray, I'm asking you to call me. Ray, can you call me?
Can you hear me now? Yeah, looking at
Barely.
the thing,
Well, your volume is
use the
your volume is
camera
very low.
microphone.
I think
Permissions for StreamYard. Use the camera. Use the microphone. They're both on, and I can see myself, but can't hear you.
You still can't hear
Let's
me.
see one more time here.
Okay.
MacBook Air microphone.
Yep, Ray, just call me. Okay. Ray is going to work it out. And in the process of trying to fix one, I think he damaged the sound. Yeah, the volume is very low. He can't hear me. No, he can't hear me. Which is why it's like, Ray, do this so-and-so. He can't hear me. Yeah, his volume dropped significantly. I don't know what took place. I am sorry. We're trying to work this out. I put a poll up. I did put a poll up. I don't entirely know how the polling thing works. Dimitri is at 90%, 89% in that poll. Yeah, he's at 89% in that poll. Yeah, the output is, yeah, I think the output is put to another one. I've ran into this issue once before when Garland brought me on Galloway's show. And it took me a while to figure out that the mic was put in a different location. Ray, can you hear me? Still can't hear me?
Can't find my phone.
Oh, you can't find your phone. I can't find his phone.
Get out and get back in.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right. I want to get my take on the interview on the thing. I don't want to be offensive to either. Um, I am bothered by Daniel's case. I am deeply bothered by the argument that's being made. He accused Dimitri of being apologists. Okay, I'll hit after I talk to Ray. Okay, he's connecting his mic and his camera. Oh,
I can hear you, Jamal. Can you hear me?
you can hear me? Yes, I can hear you. Excellent. Success. Oh, I love it when things finally work.
Jamal, nevertheless, you persisted.
Yes, we did. I was not going to let you go, Ray. I was like, I'm going to stick with this pony. It's like a well, I was about to say a bad relationship where you're like, I'm sticking with this relationship. Things are going to work out in the end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining me, man. No, thank you for your persistence. I appreciate it. How are you doing this morning? You doing all right?
I'm doing okay. I think maybe if you could speak a little louder, I'll be doing even better.
Oh, okay. Let me see. Maybe my mic dropped. Yeah,
These
my mic
things
dropped a little bit.
How about haven't been working. These things haven't been working very well. That's why I tried it the other way. But now I'm good.
Now?
So
can you hear me okay?
I'm good, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Excellent. I'm so glad you could join me.
Well,
Just
me
for the
too.
audience, Ray McGovern. He is an American political activist, former Central Intelligence Agency officer. Ray was a CIA analyst from 1963 to 1990, and in the 1980s, chaired the National Intelligence Estimates and participated in the Presidential Daily Briefing. That is fascinating. Oh, I'm always fascinated by that. Ray, there's been a lot of news that have taken place over the last, I would say, week. And so we have right much to talk about, and I want to get your take on some of this. Putin, military camo, things get real when he's in camo.
That's right.
He goes to military, let's say the Central Military Meeting, Central Military Center. He's talking to General Gerasimov. Gerasimov drops two huge bombshells. One, that Petrovsk and Kupiansk, the Ukrainian troops there, 31 battalions are surrounded. That equals out to about 10,500 men, give or take. And he also drops the new missile that the Russians have come up with, and Berezhnevik or Berezhishnik. Now the West, that's just basically shocked the world. It's a nuclear powered missile that can fly seemingly forever and just loiter and hit pretty much any target because it can move vertically, horizontally in order to evade air defense systems. And it's nuclear powered. It also has the ability to have a nuclear tip. And so you can imagine it scared the hell out of pretty much all of the West. The West have dubbed it Flying Chernobyl, which is just funny, but it also gets across the level of destruction that thing can impart. Let's go to the first part, though. Kupiansk, Petrovsk, surrounded. And it's not just those two that are surrounded. It's also Seversk. Russia's been fighting there. And so you have all of these areas that are effectively together that are going to fall almost like dominoes, back to back to back to back, leaving Kramatorsk being the last defensive line. Now, J.D. Vance once pointed out and said, well, the Russians want too much. Meaning when the Russians are putting out their demands, which haven't really changed, Vance is like, well, they want too much, trying to imply that what they are demanding is out of sorts with the military capability at their disposal. What about now? Are they still asking for, quote unquote, too much? And does the Trump administration recognize the gravity of what's about to take place when Petrovsk and Kupiansk falls?
Well, if they have not been, that is, if Donald Trump hasn't been adequately briefed now, that's a real tragedy. One possibility is that this fellow Kellogg, former general, Vietnam, not very good reputation for honesty with respect to counting troops. Remember, they said there were only half as many Viet Cong as there actually were. He
Right.
fell in with that with General Westmoreland. Anyhow, he's not got a very good reputation. As a matter of fact, he doesn't know which end is up. So whether he's intercepting the intelligence going to the president or not, or whether Rubio, who is not only Secretary of State, but also National Security Advisor, therefore the bottleneck through which intelligence needs to go to the president, that's a possibility. The president may be blissfully unaware that it's just a matter of time for the Russians to proceed where they are, to surround, which they have already done in two places. Now, the total number of forces that are surrounded, according to that briefing for Putin and by Putin, is 10,500. Okay, there are two what they call cauldrons. There's no way out. There's no way to resupply these poor guys. Now, Putin took the statesman-like stance and said, "Now look, we know it'd be easy to kill these guys, but I don't want that. I want you to take every measure to make sure that they have an opportunity to surrender." Now, that may not be possible because the Ukrainians are famous for shooting people who would like to surrender right in the back, and so they don't even try. But this is what I want you guys to do. And so he's striking a picture of, we're in no rush. We've all but won. Let's make sure that these Ukrainians have a chance to live, okay? I mean, that may sound statesman-like. Actually, it is. Okay. Now, I got to give the guy credit. Okay, now the other thing he says is, we have this Burevestnik. Okay. Now, Buria, Jamal, means storm. Okay. Vestnik, well, Burevestnik could mean a specific bird that forecasts a storm. Flies low like a cruise missile, though shoots up into the sky, there's lightning and there's a real storm, okay? There's actually a poem written by Maxim Gorky about that in 1901. Anyhow, this is the doomsday weapon. And it's not new. They've been testing it for about 6 or 7, 8 years. Actually, they had an accident with it way up north near Severodvinsk. Oh, you got a map. Good. Yeah, they had an accident where here's Putin playing cute with Gerasimov, the general. He said, now, tell me, how far did that test missile fly? 14,000 kilometers, sir. And how long was it up there? And how many hours? Okay. So the thing is as advertised. Now, when I say as advertised, probably people would like a little background here. This hasn't come out of the blue. Putin back in 2015, 2016, he advertised the fact that the U.S. could keep building these ABM systems. They could be easily defeated. These ABM systems are kind of really, really nice for Raytheon and all that. So sort of like a gift to the war makers, the war instrument makers, but they're no good in terms of defending against all these imaginative things that we have in line. So that was in 2016. He gathered some Western journalists together. They were there in St. Petersburg to be part of an economic summit. So he got them all together in this room and he says, now look, I know that you people will be so cowardly that you won't even tell your editors what I'm going to tell you. But just between you and me, I want you to know blah, blah, blah. What was the blah, blah, blah? Look, we're tired of this business about ABMs in Poland and Romania, which can also, the containers of which can also have cruise missiles and other missiles. We're tired of that. And just realize that we have all kinds of ways to circumvent that, and we're working on them, okay? So don't be surprised when we come up with very sophisticated weapon systems that render your ABM system pointless, defenseless. This Burevestnik, like the Oreshnik, the other main, this time it's less range, but they're both incapable of being defended against. So that's the other big deal. Nuclear powered, in the case of Burovesnik, unable to be shot down by any manner of things now in existence or any ABMs that we waste our money on. So what happened was there were about 12 of them. Oh, listening, or some of them fell asleep. And you could see Putin said, "What is it with you? What do I have to do?" Well, he knew what he had to do. And 2 years later, on the 1st of March, 2018, in his State of the Nation address, he did a show and tell. He showed 6 weapon systems, videos. He said, "I want to watch this. This is what this is what we have. This is what we're gonna have." And the Burovesnik was certainly one of those. They said, "Go down to the South Pole. It completely can't be defended." So this is what we have coming online. As I said later, one of them erred. It was a bad test that ended up killing several Russian scientists as well as military people. That, I think, was in 2019. Anyhow, they've been working on it, and now a couple of days before Putin revealed its existence in this very official briefing in special military quarters somewhere, okay? Days before that, they did the final test. This time it worked. And does the U.S. know that it worked? It has to know. I mean, we have such collection devices that would have been onto this as they prepared for the launch, okay? So what does this do? Well, this stops everything, okay? This says, look, we have this missile that you can't defend against. It's nuclear powered, for God's sake. Yeah, is that dangerous? Yeah, but we've surmounted the difficulties of developing it, and here it is. Now, what's this 2 thing? We're winning in Ukraine, and we have this missile. Clearly, Putin wants to say, look, there's no need to panic, folks. There are people in Russia and in the U.S. and elsewhere saying, look, for God's sake, you can't take any more insults from Donald Trump. And Putin says, watch me. My priority is, number 1, not getting into a nuclear war, for God's sake. Number 2, winning in Ukraine. And number 3, if possible, developing a decent relationship with the only other country besides China that counts, and that's the U.S. So give me a break. We're winning the war. What the hell do you want me to do? I don't want to irritate this guy. This guy is a adolescent narcissist. You deal with a person like that very carefully, okay? You assuage him. You can be really overboard and saying, well, yeah, he should have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize. So this is the way you treat him. But meanwhile, we're winning, and there's no way now. And this is the other key point. Just within the last week, what the Europeans have been defending on for money to continue to support Ukraine for, they said, another 3 years at least, was the frozen Russian assets, mostly in Belgium.
Right.
Now, on the 20th, what was it? One of the U.S. wire services reported that the U.S. has advised the Europeans it's not a good idea.
It's
not
Bloomberg.
A good precedent. Not a good idea. Yeah, right. And what happened next was the head of Belgium gets up 4 days later and says, hey, you guys say, don't worry about it. It's going to be fine. You don't have any liability if this happens in Belgium. This is unprecedented. It's stealing. I don't want to have my people, my country, rely in
Right.
this kind of jeopardy. So forget about it. So what am I saying? What they've been depending on, what they've been counting on as a kind of a done deal, is to take the frozen Russian assets. They're almost 200 billion, okay? And that would fund the war, but they ain't gonna got that anymore. So again, I think I've said this on your program. I'll just close by saying the plan is, now you can evaluate this plan as I go along, okay? The U.S. doesn't have any real weapons that they can give the Ukrainians, but they're working on them, and they'll probably have some next year or the year after. And actually, the Europeans don't have any money to pay for those weapons, and they're going to have to pay in full. Okay. But when they get the money, then they give them to the Europeans. And by that time, the war will be over. The Europeans to the Ukrainians. By that time, the war will be over. And the Ukrainians will have very few troops left to linger around and not surrender for fear of being shot in the back. So the die is cast. A month and a half ago, our vice president said, "We're done with Ukraine, okay? You Europeans, you want to give it a try? Over to you." Now the Europeans have no arms. They have no divisions. All they have is rhetoric, and most of all, they ain't got, at this point, no money, and nobody's really reporting that very much, but that's the reality, and reality has to sink in at some point. So Zelensky and his folks will probably go to some sort of beach resort, which they've purchased by absconded funds, and they'll be over. But, those people hang in, and people like the British try to encourage, just hang in there, persist, it's going to be turning out all right. It's not going to turn it out. And just let me finish with this. I mean, the fact that the U.S. is mostly responsible for this is just scandalous. We knew. Obama knew. Obama said that the worst thing we could do for the Ukrainians would be to give them the idea that they could prevail in a war against Russia. For God's sake, anybody could look at the map and see that. These crazy generals that say, "Oh, yeah, maybe we can," You can't weaken Russia. Russia has been strengthened. They've got an army up to kazoo now. Ukraine is lost. It's just a matter of time. And hopefully some good sense on the part of the West to say, all right, we'll recognize reality now. Sorry to carry on so long, but
no, you're perfectly fine. When you said the Obama thing, it just clicked in my mind. William Burns' memo, "Niet means niet," but it was the Obama. You can make an argument that this war started in 2008 with the overthrow of the Yanukovych government. I'm sorry, 2014 with the Yanukovych government.
Right.
And from that point on, inexorably, it just moved in a particular direction. That was during the Obama administration, though. And so even though Obama might have said that, it was meaning there's a dichotomy. There's a weird dichotomy in this, that Obama acknowledged that, well, you don't want to get into Russia's escalatory dominance. This was also the quote by Obama. Russia's escalatory dominance, so you don't necessarily want to get into a back and forth with Russia on this.
Right.
But he had no issue overthrowing the government. Yeah. And, in William Burns' memo, "Net means net," I think that was back in 2008. Right. He pointed out Russia knows or senses that the West is trying to encircle it, and that the pressures that are being created in Ukraine and Georgia with NATO membership is going to provoke a war.
Right.
A war that Russia will get involved in because, of course, this is taking place on their border. Meaning it seems that U.S. policy, even with Obama saying stuff like that, was inexorably moving in a particular direction. Like, there seems to be a disconnect in what Obama and that administration was saying versus what Obama was doing, as if it wasn't going to ultimately lead to a war, which it ultimately did. It's just amazing to me. Like, I mean, give me your take on that. William Burns knew that in 2008, and yet U.S. policy continued to go in that direction.
Jamal, if you ever want a job as a presidential briefer, I'd put you first in line because you ask the right questions. You look at the right stuff. Okay, here it is. Okay, 2008, William Burns, our ambassador in Russia, later head of the CIA, when he conveniently forgot all this, is summoned.
Yes, he did.
He's summoned to the foreign ministry by Lavrov. Okay, Lavrov, still around. He was early in his career. 2008. Lavrov says, "Look, Mr. Burns, do you know what yet means?" I mean, it's in his cable. Okay, "Niet" means "niet."
Yep.
Russia's red lines with respect to enlargement of NATO to include Ukraine and Georgia. Okay, it's right there in the cable. And what Lavrov says is, look, if you do this, if you try to get Ukraine in NATO, we will have to react because there will be a civil war in Ukraine. We don't want to have to intervene, but we're going to have to. So please tell your guys, "Niet" means "niet." Okay. Now that was forgotten conveniently by Bill Burns later when he's a CIA director, but that was where the Russians stood, and that was the fair warning they gave. Now, if you fast forward to from 2008, the date was February 1st, if I recall correctly, 2008. And go to 2013. Uh-oh, what did Obama do? He did something sensible. He didn't want to do a war against Syria. He said the unpardonable thing, we ought to ask Congress, because Congress is the one that's supposed to approve war. And he was looked as being kind of a snivelly little coward, right? Luckily, Putin bails him out. He
Right.
persuades the Syrians to give up all their chemical weapons. This was in early September 2013. And the deal is done. Obama doesn't have to do a war. Putin says, way to go, President. That's really sensible. And Putin writes an op-ed in the New York Times on the 12th of September saying, I welcome this new atmosphere. I trust this president. I trust Washington, right? Whoa! New York Times, look it up, September 12th. So that was the apogee. That was the height of trust. I mean, my God, trust they're talking about. Now, what happens? Victoria Nuland, on the side, spends $5 billion by her own admission. She admits this in December of the same year, 2013. And before you know it, we have a coup directed mostly by the U.S. with other Western services involved at Kiev. Now, one of the things that hasn't been revealed much, but Lavrov mentioned this week, was that when the coup was going on, Obama called Putin and he said, look, don't worry about it. We have an agreement there. The Germans and the French and even the Poles have agreed that Yanukovych can kind of postpone these elections, and so don't worry about it. So where is Putin? He's in Sochi. What's going on there? He's presiding over the ending of the Winter Olympics. So he stays in Sochi on the 14th, and then they're double crossed. Okay. Not only did Obama call Putin, Joe Biden, the vice president, called Yanukovych. You want to talk about double crossing? Okay. I mean, even if it was honest, it was reviewed by the Russians as a double cross. And now, for I think just the second time, Lavrov has been saying this openly. Look, we were double crossed. Even at the highest level, Obama assured, maybe Obama didn't know that the whole thing was going to go down the way it did, but what does that say about the power of Nuland? So, in my view, Obama either wittingly or unwittingly took part in this thing because he was weak, because he couldn't face into these people who we call the deep state. They had this all rigged, and North and Victoria knew, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to say, Victoria, no, stop this? No, I have an arrangement of trust with Putin. No, Obama was not up to that. So
Right.
we come down to what we have today. And what we have today is a natural result of what not only Obama, but I want to point out John Mearsheimer. I think maybe I have his thing right here.
Uh-huh.
Well, let me just say, John Mearsheimer, the dean of the School of Realism, get that, realism in international relations, wrote an article for Foreign Affairs, the premier magazine, okay?
Mhm.
And what he said in 11 years ago, September, 11 years ago, look, this is a big mistake trying to get Ukraine into NATO. The Russians will never allow it. If you persist in trying to do this, John Mearsheimer said, you'll end up with the utter destruction of Ukraine. My God. I'm sure John, well, I know John, I know he's not happy that he was right about that, but he
Yeah.
could see it. Anybody could see it, but those voices were suppressed. What I like about being on with you, Jamal, you give me some time to explain how at least I come at it, and I come at it on the basis of evidence, like, facts, not alternative facts, but the facts,
So
as I
alternative
see them.
facts.
And I've been at this for a while, perhaps you can tell.
But okay, two things. In one sense, you seem to, and maybe okay. I don't want to put words in your mouth. It comes across as if you exclude presidential power and presidential intent in this. Like even the Obama thing, you pointed out, well, maybe Obama didn't know. Why? I don't take it that way. I take it as Obama knew exactly what he was doing. He was just lying. The same thing with Trump. Like, is it possible that the president does know he's in on it, but because he's president, there's a certain amount of hubris, a certain amount of expectations that are built into it. I was at the Joe Biden summit with Joe Biden and Putin when they were having their summit in Geneva. I was there. I was covering it for the radio station.
In June of 2021.
20 something. Yeah.
Yeah, 21. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, you were in Geneva.
And I was in Geneva, and I was naive. I was sitting there thinking, I was like, wow, Putin and Joe Biden are sounding very similar in this moment. But what you ended up with was media attacking Joe Biden. Because the media was like, why are you sounding like Putin in this moment? Meaning, why are you two coming up with a similar phraseology in the way that you're explaining what is taking place? I'm sitting there somewhat naive thinking like, wow, maybe something is going to happen. And my boss is like, this is nonsense. Nothing is going to take place. And he was absolutely right. He was completely right. I was completely wrong. I guess my thing is it possible that the issue is Trump? That, as you pointed out, the United States was the prime mover and shaker in regard to the overthrow of Ukraine. And that presidential, or let's say policy of the U.S. has been consistent. And that the president, for the most part, has gone along with that particular policy because he's a U.S. president enacting that U.S. policy. So Kellogg, Trump probably does know what's taking place. I mean, if, for example, when at the Alaska summit, apparently Witkoff went to Russia and gave an offer. Russia gave a response to that offer, especially at the Alaska summit. And even in the way that Putin and Trump was talking about it, there was clearly something on the table. Trump's response to that offer was to try to escalate and create an oil war against Russia, where they were effectively attacking Russian positions in regards to oil refineries and everything else. That was his response. He was searching for leverage. Then you got Trump trying to get India, China to stop using Russian oil. That was the policy that Donald Trump was going with because he was looking for leverage in some way to have some kind of, let's say, dominance because he had no cards. He understood he had no cards, which is probably the reason why they blew up the Budapest summit, because what's the point of going to a summit where Putin's just going to tell you no? I guess my thing is, I don't take the issue as Zelensky. I don't take the issue as Europe. I take the issue that an American president can accept a surrender document by the Russians, meaning and maybe I'll ask this question, can a U.S. president, even with all of the losses, meaning Russia is going to take the Donbass in a few months, even when they do that, can a U.S. president accept a deal on Russian terms? I don't think they could, but you've been doing this longer than I have.
Well, from the Russian point of view, it doesn't matter.
Well,
True.
True.
They would prefer to have the U.S. signature on a binding treaty that recognized Russian interests and said no Ukraine in NATO. Then we can have a ceasefire. Then we can talk about Crimea and the other 4 provinces at some later date, which will be very, very later, as we might say. So, the Russians have won this damn war. What they really like to have is some sort of guarantee that they don't have to do this all over again. But absent that guarantee, I mean, the Ukrainian army is no more, and the Russians can go as far as they want. They could take Kiev. They don't want to do that. I mean, Kiev, it's got a couple of million people in it. A lot of them are Russian stock. Same with Odessa. So Putin is in no hurry. He's won. So he's hoping that Trump will come around. Now, Trump hasn't come around, or he's doing what Lenin used to talk about, Soviet policy, zigzagami, okay? Zigzag, you know, where they zigzag. The Russians adopted that word, and Lenin used to say, revoluция проходит zigzagami, which means the revolution proceeds zigzagami, okay? The instrumental case here. So you can't predict what Trump is going to do, but what the Russians have made clear to him in Alaska is, look, we have the upper hand here. This immediate ceasefire, forget about it. The Ukrainians will just use that to rearm. So forget. And 2 hours later, Trump does a Truth Social. Okay, we're not going to do immediate ceasefire. We wanted the whole enchilada. We think the Russians are right. We have to address the core interests of Russia, the whole enchilada, okay? Now, what happens? Well, a couple of months later, Trump is saying, well, no, we want a ceasefire. So are the Russians flummoxed? Well, they're used to it. So you can get used to anything. The big thing is you want to prevent this guy from going off half-cocked. Look, he's delusional. He's narcissistic. He's got to be pampered, so you don't set him off. That's the primary aim here by Trump, by Putin. And you know, he's had to say to his folks, "Look, for God's sake." And that's what Sunday was all about. This big briefing by the chief of staff, Gerasimov. Okay, look, we got this thing made. Okay, we've got 10,500 Ukrainians surrounded in two what we call cauldrons. That's typical of what the Soviets and the Russians do. And besides, we got this incredible miracle weapon against which there is no defense. It can fly forever. You can fly as many miles or kilometers as you want. So relax, for God's sake. Let's see if this guy finally comes to terms. Worst case for us is he doesn't. Then we have to go farther into Ukraine than we really want to. But we're in no rush. We're winning. The Ukrainians have no way of continuing this war, and the Europeans have no money to spend to buy non-existent yet weapons from the U.S. to help the Ukrainians continue this war. So relax, guys. We're going to try to still talk sense into these people. Meanwhile, not to worry, it's going to be all right. Now, to the degree that Putin has naysayers, or some of these radio or TV hosts say, "Oh no, how much insult can you take from Trump?" Putin says, "Watch me. The guy is dangerous, for God's sake. I'm a statesman. I'll take all kinds of all kinds of insults, so long as we keep winning, and we are winning. Look what's happening." And he's not lying.
Yeah.
I just hope that most of those 10,500 Ukrainian troops are not shot in the back, that they give it a chance to live, because 1 million of them already died. And my God, Jamal, it's our fault, for God's sake. It's our fault for making sure that Obama's warning, when the only sensible thing he said was, look, we have core interests. The Russians have core interests. We don't have any core interests in Ukraine. The Russians do. For God's sake, be sensible and realize they're going to defend their core interests. And look at the map, for God's sake. And you have General Milley and all that. Haven't you taken the basic course in intelligence, which shows that you have to look at the map first, and then the weather and the terrain and the locks? Now, when I say locks, I don't mean the stuff we eat with bagels in New York. I mean lines of communication and supply, for God's sake, okay? Now, it's as though Milley and those other generals that bubble up to the top never took the basic course of tactics as well as strategy. They should have said, Mr. President, this is not doable. If you try to do that, you're going to get a whole bunch of people killed. I quit. Now, what would that mean for them? Oh, their retirement will only be $200,000 a year instead of $250,000 a year. That's the kind of brass we have bubbled to the top of our army.
Let me postulate something else.
I'm sorry?
Let me postulate something else. That maybe they didn't care. That
Maybe what?
The ultimate objective was to overextend Russia. Meaning this was some of the stuff that they were putting in the Rand papers, that they didn't have an expectation that Ukraine could win, but they thought that they could, quote unquote, stick it to the Russians. Either they can damage Russia, damage the Russian economy, damage the Russian military, or at the very least overextend Russia. So, meaning they didn't really care if you had 1 million Ukrainians died. They didn't really care if a lot of Ukraine was wrecked. What they wanted to do was go after the Russians, and they were able to accomplish that using the Ukrainian military. Meaning, as we look at this and we think to ourselves, well, obviously Ukraine was going to lose. But the war planners might have been bright enough to see that, well, yeah, Ukraine was going to lose. But so what? Americans aren't dying. Europeans aren't dying. Ukrainians are dying. And we were able to get after X number of Russians, meaning from their calculus, they might have said, well, if we could kill 200,000 Russians, who cares if 1 million Ukrainians are dead? That sounds cynical, but that is in the papers.
Yeah, it's not only cynical, it's immoral, and it's stupid.
Yeah.
Let's look at Russia. Russia is stronger now than ever before.
Yes.
The Rand people, they've been consistently wrong about these things because they're paid by the U.S. Air Force, for God's sake. They come up with the answers and the strategy that looks really good. Where were the CIA national intelligence estimates at the time? Why were they suppressed? Why was Brzezinski and the Rand Corporation given the job of figuring all this out? It all has to do with people who profiteer in this war. It all has to do with the people that fund Rand and fund Raytheon and Lockheed and the rest of them. So, it's really awfully cynical. And, if they thought that they could weaken Russia in this way, then they're the same people that told Obama to say, Russia, it's just a gas station with nuclear weapons, just a gas station, And I'm thinking, okay, here's this putative gas station, right? And somebody said, all right, Rachmaninoff, get off that damn keyboard. Change that oil over there. Tchaikovsky, for God's sake, stop listening to that radio. Change these tires over here, Tchaikovsky, Pushkin, for God's sake, stop reading that damn poetry. You got a job to do here. A gas station? I mean, this is a highly cultured, and luckily, and I'll say this, luckily Putin is a statesman. He's hanging what the French call sang froid up to kazoo, okay? He's willing to wait. So we should kind of relax in that sense. And maybe we'll beat this horse to dead here, but Jamal, I have something to say about Venezuela if we have.
Yes, I wanted to get to that, by the way. In fact, I had the clip that I was lined up. You made the point of saying that, how much can Putin take and everything else. I want to show you a clip for, you mentioned his name, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rabakov. Listen to what he says. Well, it's in Russian, but I'll play the clip and I'll read out what he effectively pointed out when he was talking in reference to Venezuela. Russia and Venezuela signed a strategic partnership that was signed yesterday by Putin. And he comes out. Okay. Read it since it's in Russian. He says, we should not work to please anyone. He said the principle guide the unanimous ratification of the Russia-Venezuela strategic partnership today. It says friends in need must not be abandoned. Embodies a moral foundation, a principle made tangible by sanctions defying delivery of vital equipment to Caracas. The alliance models multipolarity governance as sustainable alternative to imperial dictates, defending sovereignty of development against a dying paradigm. The Western threats intensify as demonstrated, the capability makes it a strategic necessity undeniable. Effectively, we need to defend Venezuela. They're a friend of ours. We need to defend them. Friends shouldn't be abandoned. China has come out with similar statements, effectively saying the United States need to keep its hands off Venezuela and pull back. Apparently, Wagner is in Venezuela. That's the reporting anyway. That's put out. Give me your take on this. This is obviously a regime change war. This has nothing to do with drugs. There was an intelligence assessment that pointed out that there was no fentanyl made in Venezuela. So this is nonsense. Speedboats can't make it to the United States, and they've been murdering people. I think they murdered 21 people up to this point. Mm-hmm. Give me your thoughts on this.
Well, you're right. It's not about fentanyl. No fentanyl is coming from Venezuela. It's about flexing what few muscles we have left, you know? I trace it to what happened in China when most of the world showed up for victory over Japan Day, okay? Mm-hmm. That showed where the balance of power has shifted tectonically just over the last couple of years, okay? Now, what did the U.S. do? They said, we're going to concentrate on our preserve Latin America and internally in the United States. My God, what that means. So anyhow, Venezuela was easy pickings. And of course, the overriding rule here is that Venezuela has oil deposits that just won't quit. The deepest and most lucrative oil deposits in the world, okay, and most of them. Now, so it has to do with oil and conquering a country that we haven't been able to overthrow yet. Now, the fact that the Russians and the Chinese are coming in big time, you know, it surprises me because this is not in their bailiwick, you know. Cuba, 1962, they thought they could take a chance and they had to withdraw ignominiously because they had to take their missiles out of Cuba. I'm surprised that Ryabkov, who is a heavyweight, he's the deputy foreign minister. He probably will be succeeding Lavrov when Lavrov finally says, okay, I'm tired. So what he's saying here is, look, we have friends here, and don't take us lightly because friends are friends and they stick by one another. Now, meanwhile, we have a U.S. guided missile destroyer called the USS Samuel Gravely in Trinidad, Tobago, Port-au-Prince, okay? How far is that from Venezuela? 7 miles. Nautical miles? Okay, yeah, nautical miles. So 8 miles, okay? Now, that's damn close. And you have a carrier group coming from the Mediterranean. That's the Gerald Ford carrier group. Most estimates say they can't be offshore Venezuela for another week, okay? Now, what is Trump going to do? He's going to say, well, this is our bailiwick, and you better not fool with us, Russia or China. I don't know. That's going to be a big, big chance. But let me say a little bit about the Gravely. This is what I want to say. I know Samuel Gravely, Rear Admiral Samuel Gravely, who was the first black in the U.S. Navy to achieve officer status and then become a captain and then an admiral. How do I know Sam Gravely? He's dead now. He died 20 years ago. Because in the 50s and 60s, when I was living in Arlington, Virginia, we had lunch counter demonstrations. We had the Arlingtonians for a better county, and we were fixated on making it a more integrated county. Okay, those were the people that I worked with in Arlington, and before I went to overseas to an undisclosed country, for which I really studied German really well and had to deal in German. I can't say what the country is. Anyway, before I went over there, I said, look, we're going to rent our house out. Do you people in the civil rights part of this Arlingtonians for a Better County, do you have any black people that might be coming in? Because I live in a lily white neighborhood. And I said, oh yeah, Commander Gravely, commander at the time. Gravely, he's not going to be here for 2 months. Can you hold off for 2 months? Sure, he can. We integrated our neighborhood with Sam Gravely, Alma, his wife, and his 2 little kids. Okay, what does that mean? Well, that meant that I happened to admire Sam Gravely and got to know him. And the neighbors, like at first, but they loved the guy. They loved the whole family. And my son, my eldest son, went to school with one of the Gravely's daughters. And Rita and I, my wife, were sort of jesting at one time and said, I wonder when Sam Gravely had to leave Arlington, whether he said, to Alma, it was nice living with them, but would you want your daughter to marry one of those white people? Kidding, of course. Anyhow, what's the deal here? Sam Gravely was an honest guy. He had integrity. I bet he's bemoaning the fact that a ship named after him, then Rear Admiral Gravely, is within 8 miles of Venezuela. And I will point out one other thing, and that is the only top Navy official who used to be head of South Command, okay? He quit. He quit just after a year or so in business. Why? Well, it's clear. He didn't want to be part of suppressing the people in Venezuela, and he was against hitting and killing these people without any prerogative, without any congressional blessing, without anything at all, okay? So he quit. Now, did anybody give much publicity? No, but we're going to try to stir up the publicity. My point is, he was black, okay? So was Gravely. These are the people with guts. And since Dr. King is one of my heroes, and since when I was teaching, I always use this part of the letter from the Birmingham City Jail, I'm going to take 1/2 more minute to recite the passage that I think speaks loudly, and that is this. He was talking about how you fight injustice, Dr. King. Here it is. Like a boil, that can never be cured, but must be cut up with all its pus-flowing ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light, so too injustice must be exposed with all the friction its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. Now, what I've been suggesting with respect to those troops that are off Venezuela is that we get all kinds of big microphones and we send out all kinds of sailboats and stuff and we bullhorn, cesse la opresión, taking a leaf out of Bishop Romero's speech there where he tell these people, these are your people. Huh? The Navy is now integrated. The Navy has about 20-25% black people, Hispanic people, people who know Spanish. So get those bullhorns out there. Say, cesse la opresión. This is what you have to cease the oppression. Now, that may work, may not work, but at least we'll be doing something. So I just want to tell you the story about Sam Gravely, a guy with integrity, the first black to make it real big in the Navy, and so they named the ship after him. And now the supreme indignity that this ship, I'm sure against Sam's will, is being used to try to intimidate the Venezuelans to let us steal their oil. So anyhow, thanks for letting me explicate that.
No, I love those stories. It's also pretty wild that the military is not even being paid, and yet they're using. Meaning, it's more breathtaking than that. The government has been shut down for over a month. The military is not being paid, and yet the U.S. still finds it pertinent to overthrow another government using "quote unquote" drugs, kind of like they did in Panama, as a pretext to do so. I find it to be pretty astonishing.
Yeah,
And just
try to explain. I mentioned the meeting in Beijing. That was clear for the whole world to see that we were becoming a second-rate power. Now, what happens when the U.S. suffers a reverse like that? Well, think back to 1983, when we foolishly had 241 Marines killed in a barracks in Lebanon, killed by a bomb that went off, okay?
right,
How did Reagan react?
pulled him out.
Well, I'm sure he's saying, what the hell were those? What the hell did you let that happen? Okay. And then did the Israelis know about it? Well, yes, sir. We think the Israelis. Did they tell us? Well, no, sir. They didn't tell us. My God, let's get the hell out of there. Reagan had some sense. Okay. And what did he do? He pulled those troops out onto carriers, and then in a couple of weeks they were home. Now, why am I saying that? Because right after that, they had a council of war in the White House. I was on active duty then. I was briefing the president's daily brief. I know this from other sources, so I'm not divulging classified. But what happened was this: we got to show our muscle. What can we do? Oh, those people, those leftists in Grenada, that little island, they're threatening to take our medical students there hostage. Have they really? Well, no. They're saying that they're saying they don't like them, and they might. Well, how are they supposed to? We'll attack Grenada. We'll send the 82nd Airborne into Grenada, and we'll have a big win. And that's precisely what they did. Now, I happen to know that the Grenadian authorities had already told Washington, no, we'll send those medical doctors home on the next ship. No, don't come in. But we wanted to show our muscle, okay? So the parallel is there. When the U.S. Suffers a major defeat, as it did with all those people gathering in Beijing, and then it has to come back and say, well, we're gonna do what we want in our own hemisphere and in our own country. My God, using the military in our own country. Well, that's a defensive reaction just to show our muscle. And of course, Venezuela has all that oil. We're trying to get it for a while. So we use this pretext of non-existent fentanyl coming from Venezuela. And, people need to be educated on this. And that's why I'm so glad that you brought these things out, Jamal. People don't know these things, and they need to know them because, the next thing you know, the USS Gravely is going to be gravely involved in the epitome of injustice, shooting those guided missiles off into Venezuela. And I'm sure Sam and Alma and their children will be scratching their heads up where they are now and say, my God, don't use our name on that kind of ship.
How far do you think they're going to go with this? Do you think, the reporting showed that Rubio is the one that is effectively running this. Trump effectively allows them to run it under this pretext of quote unquote drugs. And that Rubio has convinced Trump that the best way to deal with Venezuela and to secure the oil and the resources in Venezuela is a coup. Meaning the reporting was that Maduro was like, look, I will give you the oil effectively. And Rubio effectively told Trump, the best way to deal with this, cut out the Russians, the Chinese, etc., is to take Venezuela.
That's
Do you
right.
think that's how far? How far do you think they're going to go with this? Do you think there is actually military involvement in a sense of sending in military in order to try to accomplish this?
Well, you make a very important point because Maduro, the head of Venezuela, pretty much made all the concessions he could possibly make with respect to oil interests and giving U.S. companies all kinds of carte blanche to do what they want. But that's not what Rubio wants. Now, Rubio, mind you, is the Secretary of State. He's also the National Security Advisor. He's the funnel through which everything gets to the president. Now, what remains to be seen is whether Rubio, not the strongest guy in the world, will be intimidated by this latest proclamation from Ryabkov, Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov from Moscow, and what the Chinese are saying. And something that I don't know. And what I don't know is how many missiles the Venezuelans already have that can hit ships at the distance where the Gravely is now. Would they use them? Under duress, I think they would. So what will the military, the top military, say to Trump if he says, "Can we do this?" I don't know. But if they're as stupid as Milley and the other guys, they'll say, "Well, we'll give it a try, see what happens. You know, it's our bailiwick, it's our neighborhood, Monroe Doctrine, all that kind of stuff." So I don't know what's going to happen. I confess, I'm surprised that Yerapkov has jumped in with 1.5 feet here. There's
Yep.
always room to, give supplies later after the war is over or whether it's underway. But, we'll have to see here because this is really close to the bone. This is very similar to Cuba in 1962
Mhm.
when we had to face down the Russians. And we'll have to see if the Russians decide that they're going to get involved, and we'll have to face them down again, and whether Trump will be as smart and as diplomatic and as level-headed as John F. Kennedy. And I won't ask you to comment on the possibility.
Yeah, this is very disturbing to me. It's just very disturbing. It's look, I know Obama had his kill list, and Obama was murdering people in the Middle East. But for some reason, it feels like there's a difference when you could see it. Like, do you remember when? And I'll let you go on this one because I'm keeping you long. Do you remember when I think it was a football player, and they came out and said he punched his wife in the elevator, punched his girlfriend in the elevator, and people were like, "Oh, that's horrible, that's bad." And then the video came out, and it showed him punching a woman and knocking her unconscious in an elevator. In which case, everybody lost their minds. And if I'm not mistaken, he almost got fired from his job after that video came out. There's a difference between seeing it versus having it just as a conception. Us watching them blow up boats on this thinly veiled, idea of drugs is very disturbing. And then for them to go with this idea that, yeah, we're going to murder Venezuelans and that it's okay to murder Venezuelans. Lindsey Graham came out and said murdering Venezuelans is not a war crime, which is mind blowing. I don't.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, I just think the new element that you introduced, I hadn't been aware that Yerapkov had said that.
Mhm.
The U.S. has proven to be a weak sister, not only in Ukraine, but in other areas. The big offensive against China has sort of petered away because China is so strong that
Yes.
even the Navy owns up to the fact, we can't build enough ships fast enough to keep up with the Chinese. And again, lines of supply, lines of communication and supply. I mean, look at the wideness, the width of the Pacific Ocean, for God's sake. So the U.S. has been shown to be a paper tiger, just as the Chinese have always claimed it to be. But how Trump, in his unpredictable, irascible, nativist kind of reaction will react is something that we have to monitor really closely because most Americans have been brainwashed to think, well, it's okay to do these things because the media gives them the idea that, well, yeah, fentanyl. Well, I had a cousin die of fentanyl. Oh, but nobody knows there's no fentanyl coming from Venezuela. This is something completely different. So, Jamal, I think you're one of those guys that Dr. King referred to when he said you have to open the boil with all its pus-flowing ugliness to the natural lights of air and light. And so I compliment you on that. And thanks for letting me have my say here. These are really perilous times. And what we need is precisely what we do have on the Russian side, a cautious, perspicacious guy who is not going to let Yerapkov or anybody else do something really, really, really out of this world, but is trying to warn Trump that, look, this is a worldwide thing now. The tectonic shift in relationships between the United States and Russia and China has changed. What you now have is what we used to have is kind of a triangle that was equilateral, like,
Yeah,
China, Russia,
pure
US.
nation.
Now it's isosceles, if you remember your geometry. Uh, here's Russia, here's China, here's the US in terms of power projection. And whether they're going to do what we all fear they're going to do with respect to offshore missiles from the USS Gravely or worse, a ground invasion, I just don't know. But I'm sort of interested in the fact that Putin has allowed Yapkov to say, look, think twice about this. I think the Chinese have capabilities as well, not only with the missiles they've already sold to Venezuela, but also they could say, look, Mr. Trump and Mr. Navy, we could stir up all kinds of trouble in the South China Sea or the Taiwan Straits. Sorry, I need to sneeze. Don't push us to that. I
Yeah.
guess I'm about to sneeze and you're about to be sick of me, Jamal. Thanks for giving me so much time.
Oh, of course, Ray. I mean, look, I appreciate you joining me. I appreciate your insight. No, I deeply appreciate you joining me as a guest. Ray McGovern. And let me give you a bio. Ray McGovern. He's an American political activist, former Central Intelligence Agency officer. McGovern was an analyst, CIA analyst from 1963 to 1990, and in the 1980s, chaired the National Intelligence Estimates and participated in preparing the Presidential Daily Brief. Ray, you have a fantastic rest of your day, man. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Jamal.
You
Good
be
luck.
safe. Bye-bye. All right. Shout out to Ray McGovern for that. Yeah, shout out to Ray McGovern. I'm going to give the poll results from the debate between Dimitri and Daniel. Daniel, I think he just sent a text saying he very much enjoyed it. I sent Dimitri an email just checking on him, making sure it went okay for him, that everything is all right. Debates are funny in that way. People sometimes greatly dislike each other at the end of those debates. It polarizes the audience regardless of the take. The debate, 86% for Dimitri, 4% for Daniel. Who the hell is that 4%? 4% said yes, 7% said no. I just couldn't get rid of the yes and no, and I wanted to put the poll up. Who the hell is that 4%? Who the hell is that 4%? That's my question. I appreciate both. I do. And I know the audience, with the number skewed to 80-something% like that, is very angry at what Dimitri was saying. I'm sorry, what Daniel was saying. As a moderator, I try my best not to intrude. I do try to funnel it into the prescribed direction that it was. But obviously, in the context of the debate, it's kind of like a fight. You end up all over the place, regardless of what the main topic was. I like Daniel as a person. He's cool people, honestly. I know you guys may not think that just because of the take that he was gave, but I like Daniel. So when I'm saying this about the perspective that was given. I think that perspective is trash. If I point out and I say there are certain elements that constitute genocide, and those elements have to do with issues of starvation, trying to destroy a group, et cetera, you give the list. And I point out that this group has murdered over 100,000 people. They have thrown people in cages indiscriminately, tortured those people when they were in those cages. They're running an apartheid state, an open-air ghetto. And in this very specific case, openly murdered women and children, meaning the overwhelming majority of the people that were murdered were just women and children. And the response to that is, yeah, but Hamas wanted to do that. And it's like, okay, well, we don't know that. They wanted to do that. And even if you say they did want to do that, they obviously don't have the capacity to do it. And when you agree, meaning the final argument was like, Daniel was like, well, why are we even arguing about this? We agreed that Hamas didn't have the capacity to do it. Okay, so how are you making the argument of a genocide then? Meaning your final point undercuts the original point that you were making to try to justify the yada yada, the equality thing. Again, media is never neutral. If I am the BBC and I'm watching 100,000 people get killed, and my response to that is, yeah, but Hamas wanted to do that. Okay, well, I may want a pony. I may want functioning kidneys. I may want to, to have a six pack. I may want to look like, the guy from Game of Thrones, Jace Momoa, or whatever his name is. I think, I would say sexiest man alive. I don't know how any woman is not attracted to him. And no, I'm not gay. I'm just pointing out that he's like, people can want anything. I mean, want to eat bacon without gaining weight in perpetuity. Wants are not the same thing as capability. Wants are not the same thing as being able to do something. And just because somebody says something doesn't mean it's true. One case is theory. The other case is in fact. One case is a group that is responding to decades of oppression, of being in an apartheid state, of being raped and beaten and killed periodically, of being starved. That is in response to. The other group is actively doing it. There's a difference in these things. And to make an argument as if these things are equal is nonsense. I would even go so far as to say it's almost dishonest. I don't think the argument works. Now, you could say, well, the Genocide Convention, and you focus on one element of it, and say, well, that doesn't make sense. I think it makes perfect sense. Are you destroying the population? Yea or nay? Are you showing an intent to do it? Yea or nay? Does it meet the requirement of these elements that are enumerated? Yea or nay? It's not just about wants. I'm sorry, it's not just about wants. And even if Hamas did want this kind of uprising from the other groups, they didn't get it. So there's that. Again, Bobby wants a pony. Is Bobby going to get a pony for Christmas? No. It doesn't really matter, right? As for the future of Gaza, well, obviously, the Palestinians should make a choice. It's also obvious that the U.S., Israel, and some of these Quisling governments are doing everything in their power to prevent Palestinians from getting that choice. Obviously, Israel was funding Hamas because they wanted to create a distinction between, let's say, the Palestinian Authority versus Hamas, meaning we want to create a separation between these things. And not just create a separation between these things, we want to scare the hell out of the Israelis to somehow justify whatever we do. There's another element to this that's very gross. This idea that because of what took place on October 7th, and again, even the denial that Israel murdered its own people is problematic to me, but whatever. Let's say Hamas did kill 1,200. Why are we pretending that what Hamas did either justifies what Israel did or in some way forced Israel to do it? Because the argument that was being presented was like, well, Hamas did this, and so Israel had to murder hundreds of thousands of people, 2/3 of which were women and children. How could they have? They didn't have a choice. That's nonsense. It's nonsense on its face, right? At every opportunity that a potential ceasefire or deal came up, even members of the Biden administration at this point out, it was squandered. Netanyahu did everything in his power to prevent a deal from taking place. They used what happened on October 7th as their justification to eradicate the population. Now, this is on top of Israel being notified that this was being planned. It is very likely that they allowed it to take place, knowing full well that it was going to be used as a justification for an eradication of the population, with the United States effectively backing and Europe backing it. I don't know. I find that argument to be trash. I'm sorry. And again, I'm saying this as somebody who likes Daniel. I think he's cool people. All things being equal, I just think the argument is trash. Dimitri made his case. He explained it thoroughly, especially from the legal standpoint. Genocide is a legal argument. It's not a feeling argument. It's a, does this match the legal definition of these things? Yeah or nay? It is one of those things that is in the ICJ, it is in the ICC, and they're not looking at this as a feeling argument. They're looking at this for its legal distinctions. There's a difference between being a lawyer and knowing the legalities of a thing versus a layman who doesn't understand the legalities of those things in the way that they function in a courtroom, which is where the stuff functions. So I appreciate both, and I appreciate both being able to come on and make their case. Obviously, I have a point of view. I know Daniel and I have argued over this once before, and so obviously our point of views differ on this. That has nothing to do with Daniel's take on other issues. When he's talking about government, he's talking about socialism, he's talking about labor, he's talking about all those things. He's fantastic. But this just happens to be his take on this issue. So again, no shade is thrown at him. I'm going after his political point of view on this. I just greatly, fundamentally disagree. And it seems like the audience, to a tune of 84%, also disagreed. So shout out to my audience. You're awesome. It does not take a lawyer to know this is genocide. Agreed, Fela. Agreed. Which, again, it feels like it was a whitewashing, which, if you look at many of the arguments that take place on either CNN, Piers Morgan, many of these shows that have these type of arguments, that's what you effectively get. One side tries to whitewash, the other side tries to make the point of saying, how the hell are you whitewashing hundreds of thousands of people being murdered? So yeah, Felu, agreed. Let's go to the chat. Arise for Fries, after this debate, do a poll and we can vote the winner. Did that. Arise for Fries, thank you for the suggestion, which is why I put that poll up when I saw this. Daniel is wrong. Oppressed have the right to resist. What is this? Righty warrior? Is that right? RT? Well, I just said warriors. Agreed, which is kind of the point that I was just making. An oppressed group has the right to push back. And look, the majority of I don't want any innocent person to be killed or murdered. Full stop. Right? Israel has slaughtered hundreds of thousands of people, the overwhelming majority of which are women and children. Hamas, even if we go by the 1,200 number, which I don't accept, but even if we take that number, that is in comparison to how many Palestinians being murdered over the course of the 70 years, and adding now the hundreds of thousands. This is not an equal equation. I'm sorry, the equation is not equal. There's that. People who are oppressed have the right to resist their oppression. And if those Jews were able to kill every last guard and fight their way out of that ghetto, nobody would be saying anything about it. I think it's a nonsense proposition to say that, well, if they did that, then we'd be having a different conversation about the Jews. No, we won't. No, we won't. When we're looking back at slavery today and we're looking at the rebellions that were taking place from the slaves, we don't look at those and condemn the slaves for revolting and killing whoever was around them as they were doing that revolt. Who does that? Nobody does that, because they look at it as they were slaves. They had the right to resist the fact that they were being oppressed. Same thing with the Jews, same thing with the French. And yes, same thing with Hamas. I find it to be a nonsense proposition that, well, I mean, they're oppressed and they're being occupied and they're being beaten and killed and raped, etc. But they need to fight back in a particular way. And they need to, when they're breaking out of the prison, they need to be very particular in the way they do it. Get out of here. Get out of here. You have an oppressed population with an apartheid state holding an open-air ghetto. You get a prison revolt for all intents and purposes. And we're criticizing the people who were maligned and oppressed for the last 70 years in the way that they're pushing back on their oppression. I'm not doing that. Yeah, no. And then when we're looking at the polling on it, and the polling is pretty clear, like Hamas has its detractors, like any country has its detractors. It's a government. Every government has its detractors. That's just life. The Palestinian Authority has not had an election for longer than Hamas. And yet we're talking about Hamas. I think it's outrageous. And when the public is asked about it, meaning the Gaza, the Palestinians, their response is, well, yeah, we'll vote back in Hamas if Hamas is on the ballot versus Mahmoud Abbas. Because, again, as I pointed out once before, he is deeply hated as a collaborator. So, I mean, we should be honest when we're talking about this stuff. It's not like you can invoke a poll, say the poll is legitimate, and just say, I disagree with it. Okay, well, you can't do both, right? You can't invoke it in one sense and then deny it in another sense for stuff that you don't like, the fact of what it says. It's like, for fuck's sake, I mean, be honest. I don't know. The debate, look, I appreciated the fact that they're doing it. All debates function this way. When people disagree vigorously on a particular subject matter, especially something like this, which is why I appreciate the fact that both were willing to actually have this debate, because I knew it was going to be, in fact, it wasn't contentious. They just had different points of view. I don't like having debates, if I'm being bluntly honest with you, because I don't like the feeling coming out of it. It depends on what the debate is. I've avoided having debates on the whole Israel-Gaza issue because I don't like the way the Israeli position is often argued. It is often argued in a way to whitewash, to minimize, to pretend as if this horrific atrocity isn't happening. And even if it's acknowledged over the course of the debate, just by virtue of the debate, it gets minimized. I hate that. I hate that. It bugs the shit out of me. Other topics, no issue. On this topic, big issue, big issue, big issue. Which makes me appreciate the fact that Daniel was willing to do it that much more, because I actually like him as a person. So I just disagree with this thing. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. Let's see. Auntie Ann, just tuning in for today and wanted to comment that I really like your new space. Well, thank you for that, Auntie Ann. So do I. The colors and lighting are soothing, visually appealing. It's great. Auntie Annie, thank you for that. It took me a while to figure out how to make this work, though. Each place is different and has challenges in a way that has to be arranged in order to get the studio right. Albania was a much larger space, which was it was a full-blown apartment, much easier to operate in. It had its downsides, but for ultimately the apartment was good. Malaysia was a decent space, no issue. Indonesia was cramped. It was very cramped. It was an apartment, but it was like a studio, so it was very small. But again, you make do. Nepal is a much larger space. In fact, I paid more for this because I knew I had to have the studio, and I wanted to make sure that the internet and everything else was rock solid. So I effectively paid more in order to get this particular space. This is a full-blown apartment. It's not bad, actually. But I got it because of the table. When I saw the table in the listing, I was like, all right, the table is big enough to have a studio with. So also the colors in Nepal are, there's a color tone to Nepal that many of the locations, the housing, the everything else has look. And so this just looks like Nepal. It's a wood place. So thank you, Auntie, and I appreciate that. I very much appreciate that. Let's see. This is Anna Banana. Anna Banana. Even if you think you can't win, always resist your oppressors. Anna Banana, if you don't resist, you accept effectively whatever is dished out. Yeah. I mean, look, sometimes it's not about winning. Sometimes it's about, if I'm unsafe, you're unsafe. Period. I've had this argument with Netanyahu's like press guy. And I pointed out to him, you understand that the idea that you should be able to murder people, kill people, imprison people, and that you should feel safe as you do that is nonsense. They don't seem to get it, or they don't seem to care about that. So, yeah. Jay Galt, John Galt. No honest actor would equate Hannibal directive concerns with denialism. Yes, agreed. Daniel is a lefty for hire. KJ, what is this? Jay is too honorable to condemn his guests. I mean, look, let's say for the moment that he believes it. I don't think Daniel is lying. I think Daniel believes it. For him, I think it's a confirmation bias. In the same way that you can look at a poll, you could say this poll is credible, and then you deny the poll after the fact because you have beliefs about the poll. Where it's like, well, no, I think Mahmoud Abbas is more popular than that. And it's like, but dude, the poll is showing that he's not. And you just said the poll is credible. You can't have it both ways, right? Which is kind of Dimitri's point. You can't have it both ways. You invoked this poll. I picked the poll that you invoked. You ignored everything else that was in this poll when you were arguing that Hamas is completely unpopular. Yes, there were protests, but there were 7 million people that were out there protesting Donald Trump too. How many people were protesting in Europe? How many people were, meaning governments, democracies, quote unquote, also have massive amounts of protests. Less than 50% of the people in the United States vote. Okay, what does that mean for the US political system? And what we call ourselves a quote unquote democracy. I'm trying to point out that protests in and of itself doesn't necessarily mean that everybody disagrees or that if a vote was held, that particular group wouldn't win. I take it as a BS argument, especially if the polling that you're invoking is pointing out that you're wrong. Now, I greatly disagree with Daniel on this. Again, I would like to emphasize, like him as a person, as a human being, deeply appreciate his takes on issues of government and everything else. On this, I think he's deeply wrong. I think he's deeply wrong. And I don't think it would be a shock to him that I think that, because, again, him and I have had this disagreement. I'm not saying anything about him as a person. All of this is about his political point of view. And yes, he would be back on the show in conversations about government and those type of things. So I understand that the audience feels some kind of way. But this show is not an echo chamber, nor do I want it to be an echo chamber. And people will have points of view that your humble hosts vehemently disagree with. And yet, I don't hate the person because I disagree with the person, if that makes sense. There's certain topics where I can disagree and I don't care. This is not one of them. Like I am emotionally invested in this because of that level of damage and horror that state of squatters, of terrorist squatters, is committing. So yeah, I feel some kind of way about the way this was argued. But no, I'm not going to condemn Daniel for it. And I do think he's being genuine in his take, even if I think his take is wrong, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. And yes, he's a lefty. He's a socialist. He is a socialist. He's not socialist fire. He is actual socialist. Crown Heights Brainiac. Whoa, thank you for this. Please don't have Daniel. Crown Heights. Thank you, Crown Heights. You are greatly appreciated. Look, I've told you before, man, you guys make the show what it is. I mean, especially yesterday, I fucked up and didn't put Mark's monetization on. That video got like 10,000 views. That video is probably going to hit 15, 16,000 views. That is not a huge amount for channels with hundreds of thousands of subs. For my channel, that's actually a decent video. When I say you guys pay for the content, I really mean that. Your support helps makes this content what it is and helps allow this show to actually function and operate. Me being at a different location is me saving money. It's not me balling. It's actually the opposite. I left the States for the exact reason that I couldn't afford to be in the States. And I needed time to effectively grow and build the channel. And I found an apartment for $300 in Albania, and I took it. And my objective was build the show, save money. And despite the isolation actually helps you just focus on the task. When I say that you guys makes the show what it is, I mean it. When I say your support allows the show to function, I mean it. My job is to grow the show, and your support helps me do just that. So thank you, Brainiac. And thank you all of you for contributing, actually. But Brainiac, while I deeply appreciate your donation, Daniel will be back on the show, providing he doesn't hate my commentary on this. Again, I want to emphasize, my commentary is not about Daniel. I like Daniel. He has been a friend, or I could say a professional friend, for the last 6 years, I think. Yeah, about 6, 7 years. Just because a person has a bad take on one thing doesn't mean their entire take overall is bad on everything. Daniel's take on government, as he pointed out to Dimitri, he was like, I despise the U.S. government. Well, he's right about that, right? These people are sociopaths. But on this, I think he's woefully wrong. I think he's woefully wrong on this. Just to let you know, Daniel Lazare, intent means the purpose to your action, not an idea in your head about your action. Thank you. Thank you. I think I was trying to make that argument before. You wanting to do something is very different than you doing something. I want a pony. I want a BLT. I want a country ham sandwich. Yes, I'm hungry. And they don't have those things here. I want a turkey sandwich. For whatever reason, they don't have turkey here either. I don't get that. I haven't had turkey in God knows how long. I don't know why they don't have it here. My intent is to get a turkey sandwich. Do I have the capability of doing it? No, I do not. There's a difference in those things. And as you point out, it's about why you're doing something, not about what's in your mind. And that was, I was going with the whole legal thing. Have you ever, legal language is a language unto itself, and it's interpreted by the area to which it exists, which is law. It's kind of like medical language. Have you ever, let's say you had something that was going on with you, and you said, okay, well, I'm going to look on the internet and learn more about it. And the internet gives you this information. And then you go to the doctor and you present the information, and the doctor looks at you and starts laughing and says, look, that's not what that means. Like if you look at a bottle and it says, here are all the symptoms that may come along with taking this product. And it may be like 100 of them. And you're like, oh my God, I don't want to take this product. And as you talk to your doctor explains to you, look, when those tests were taken, anything that was going on with the person had gas, the person had stomach ache, the person ears started messing up. All of those things were just listed. It doesn't mean that they have the same percentage of opportunity to present. Meaning a language has to be taken into context that it was created. A layman looking at law is going to get it wrong. And so it's like, does Hamas have a want to do something is different than intent. What is the reason that Israel is murdering all of these people? Is the intent to eradicate the population. But again, intent in this case is formed by something they're already doing, not something that is in their minds. Susan, thank you for making that clear. I was trying to explain it, but you nailed it on the head much better than I did. Just to let you know, Daniel Lazare, intent means the purpose of an action, not the idea in your head without action. So even if your actions don't result in death, the intent behind the action is genocide. Dr. Susan Jacobs, thank you for that. You're fantastic. Thank you for that. You've explained that beautifully. Yeah, you've explained it beautifully. Java Joe, super sticker. Thank you, Java Joe. SDRO505. You can't make fucking excuses nowadays about selection or elections and dictators when Western democracies killed millions, hijacked elections, genocide, playing victim. What is this? Play voting games with hand-picked corporate puppets on ballots at home, etc. Yeah, that's why I brought up the whole Mahmoud Abbas thing, because it's like, how are you bitching about Hamas when Abbas, who you believe is better liked, despite there's nothing to back that up at all, and even the polling that you pointed out finds him deeply, deeply, deeply unpopular, when they haven't even had elections in longer period of time. And to your point, Western democracies, in regards to what they were doing to Romania and what they were doing to the AFP in Germany, Alternative for Deutschland, effectively saying, AFD, effectively saying, well, we're going to treat them as criminal cases because obviously the government is so unpopular that they actually have a chance of potentially winning at some point. Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Obviously, Palestine should determine who Palestine wants to govern it and lead it. Obviously, the West Bank and Gaza should have some level of reunification in order to have a united front. But that has nothing to do in the context of the future of Gaza, which was the question, right? The future of Gaza is who determines what happens. And my point of view is Gaza, or Palestine should determine. Thank you for that. SDRO505. Thank you for that. This is Kate Ferguson, super sticker. Thank you, Kate Ferguson. Thank you. Frank Frio, Jamal Mill 9999 says you should have Ray on all the time. Great show today. Ray is a great guest. Ray can come on every week if he was available. I would love to have Ray every week. But the people who have been in government often have a different take than, well, that sounds silly, but and maybe this is obvious. People who've been in government and have seen how the mechanics work, how the machinery work, often have a different take than people who are outside of government. I can only see what is above, only from below, as Cannabis pointed out. That is kind of the way it is when you're looking at what is taking place. When you're inside of the machine, it's kind of a different animal. You see these people as human beings. It's like the people who you work with, in a sense, in an odd way, despite the fact that you're doing something in that particular service. So when Ray is briefing the president, for example, or sitting in on those presidential briefings, when Ray is working at the CIA, he is seeing a machine work in a way that we can't see it. It's almost, we don't see these people as human beings in the real sense of the word. We don't see how they make their choices. We don't see what is acting upon them as they make their choices. Well, Ray has. It's an interesting take. I always appreciate people like that. Jeff Rich, same thing, right? Jeff Rich was in government for a period of time, for 30 years. You see how the bureaucracy works. And so when he's thinking about this stuff, he's thinking about this stuff from the standpoint of, okay, these are human beings. This is the way human beings operate when they're in this particular system, et cetera. I don't know. It's a different animal. John Kiriakou is another one. Yeah. What he said, now Frank wasn't trolling. That was a direct quote from Mill. Look, what's his name is a great guy. Dr. Susan Jacobs. Benefit, what is this? Benefit from you too, this amazing community Jamal created. Aw. Well, thank you for that, Susan. Thank you for that. I don't know if I created it. It's my I always looked at it as people accrue. Channels are worlds. I've been on the channel for what, 10 years? YouTube channels are worlds. When you go to any individual channel, there's a different feel to the channel. My mom went to Georgia Galloway. Garland had me on Galloway's show. And my mom was in the chat and she was like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? Like, she was just shocked by the whole thing, right? They're worlds. And on some level, the world is based upon the individual because it has to be, right? If there's no similarities with the person, or if there's no commonality, then it just doesn't fit, doesn't work. So I guess when you say I created it, we created it. That's the way I look at it. It's not like we created it. I mean, you guys accrue around because there's some commonality among all of us where it works. So you all have my appreciation. I'm going to end this. We've come to the end. Oh, Kat, not Kate. I'm sorry. Kat. Did I get it? Did I fuck it up? What did I say? Kate? Kat Ferguson. Thank you, Kat Ferguson. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. All right. Late food run worth waiting for. Yeah, I'm going to get food myself. All right. I'm going to call this a day. This was a good show. I'm going to check on both Dimitri and Daniel to make sure everybody's good. I don't want anybody hating each other or hating me as a result. But I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank all of you for the donations. Maybe we should have more debates more often. Maybe that should be the case. I guess we just have to find the subject matter to make that work. Set up more debates. Yeah. Someone just to set up more debates. Yeah, that's always hard. I don't know. Like, you have to find people who want to do that, like put themselves through that. But if somebody is open to it, I'm willing to be a moderator for it. You just have to find the subject and topic and all that good stuff. But good for you. Good for your money too. Yeah, it seems to be that way, right? It splits the audience. It creates division in the audience. And anything that creates division in the audience immediately, people want to comment on it. So play chess against idiots in the chat. I've offered to play chess against people in the chat for cash. Nobody took me up on that offer. If Fiorella wants to get down, I'm willing to do that. Totally willing to do that. She just let Let me need to know. You guys are talking about Fiorella from oh, what is the channel? What is her channel called? What is her channel called? Oh, it'll come to me in a moment. What is her channel called? It'll come to me in a moment. Who say I'll play you? Well, I play on chess.com. Fiorella, Combo Coach. That's it. Combo Coach. Combo Coach. For one, I didn't know she played. But if she wants to get down, my email is below. She's more than welcome. Get her ass kicked. I am an equal opportunity person. Old ladies, old men, children, disabled. I will beat the living shit out of each and every one of them equally. I'm equal opportunity that way. So I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. I might get some chess in, maybe. What time is it? Yeah, I might get 30 minutes of chess in. But look, you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. I want to thank all of you for joining us on this. Be safe. Be kind. I will pray for you, Jamal. Well, thank you, Cherie. I appreciate that. You guys have a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks all.